School board is being conducted in person. This work session can be monitored electronically by streaming online from the district website, and an archived recording will also be available on the district website. The purpose of the work sessions are to build trust and teamwork, to exchange information, and when applicable, to provide direction in order to facilitate efficient and effective decision-making at regular school board meetings. The outcomes of today's work session are board members will receive information and updates on concurrence with the American Indian Parent Advisory Committee, achievement and integration, budget review, long-range financial planning and capital budget, referendum planning survey results, and the board calendar will be reviewed. It's a lot to cover tonight. To acknowledge attendance this evening, I'll ask that board members please state their names. Let's start with.
Oh, thank you. School Board Director Heather Douglas.
Director Thomas Brooks.
Director Jackie Mosqueda-Jones.
Director Tanya Simons.
Director Tamara Grady.
And I'm Director Kelsey Dawson-Walton and present. I'll now ask Superintendent McIntyre to facilitate this evening's work session.
All right, good evening, board members. Thank you, Chair Dawson-Walton. I want to first welcome our guests with us tonight and many Osseo area school staff who will be part of our presentations tonight. We appreciate all the time and contributions for representing their work this evening. I know they worked hard in preparation. So we have 4 agenda items tonight, and as we get into the balance of the agenda, we're going to try to stick to some timelines to try to get through our agenda in a timely fashion. So first, we have about 50 minutes allotted for our concurrence with our American Indian Parent Advisory Committee, along with our achievement and integration budget review. And then we'll move on for a 45-minute session roughly with our team on long-range financial planning and capital budget update. And then we'll move on to our referendum planning survey results, which we've allotted about 45 minutes for, and then wrapping up with our school board calendar review. So to get us started, I want to first welcome Jessica Travis, Arlene Fairbanks from our American Indian Parent Advisory Committee for joining us tonight, and I'm going to introduce Brian Bass, our Assistant Superintendent for Equity and Achievement, to get us started. So thank you, Brian. Should give you a better heads up.
Chair Dawson Walton, members of the board, Superintendent McIntyre, it is my privilege to be able to introduce guests with us this evening from our AIPAC committee. We have our president of the committee, Jessica Travis, and we have another representative from the committee, Arlene Fairbanks. I had the opportunity to join both of them at their most recent meeting and had the opportunity to observe some of the traditions and cultural heritage work that's happening at those meetings, and it was just wonderful to experience the community and to be included. So thank you all for allowing me to come into that space and be welcomed and share that time with you. So at this time, I will invite President of AIPAC, Jessica Travis, to come up. Arlene, I'm not sure if you want to come up with her as well, but please feel free, and they will share about the concurrence. Thank you.
Hamatakiapi Nachawia Machiapi, Iamasoha Nawakpawash Hamataha. I'm Jessica Travis. I am a Lakota from, I'm enrolled at the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, and I have 3 kids in the school district, and I am the current chair of our AIPAC.
Arlene Fairbanks here. My desk is Nishlo, Nakad and Abbas chain, Torikoj, Adash Chake, Lasha, Adash another. Good evening, everyone. My name is Arlene Fairbanks. I am Navajo from Navajo Nation in Arizona. My clans are Coyote Pass Clan, and I'm born for the Mexican People Clan. My grandparents are of the Saltwater Clan and the Red Bottom Clan. I have 2 students, well actually I should say 1 student in Osseo School District online. He's 11th grade. My oldest already graduated a couple of years ago. So thank you and appreciate it.
All right. So Superintendent, Chair, and board members, the American Indian Parent Advisory Committee, AIPAC, has placed a vote of concurrence for District 279 on February 2nd of 2022. The concurrence vote acknowledges the school district's willingness to collaborate with the AIPAC in seeking the success of our American Indian students, while also recognizing that there's much more to do. We appreciate the inclusion of Section 5 to Graduation Policy 613, the updated data systems to accurately count the number of American Indian students in the district, and the implementation of the Talking Points application that provides the Indian Education Department another way to communicate and reach all of our families. We are excited to hear about the summer program that is being created for our youth to participate in language and cultural lessons this year. These are all great steps forward. The vote of concurrence, however, was not unanimous. These are all, on both sides of the voting decision, our American Indian families believe that the school district still has a lot of work to do to effectively reach each and every one of our students to ensure their success within the school system. The achievement gap continues to be a significant issue. The percentage of Indigenous students proficient in math and reading is well below their white classmates. The percentage of our students proficient in math is below 28%, and less than 34% of our students are proficient in reading. Our families are asking for access to free tutoring and assistance in setting that up for their students. They also need accessibility to other services such as speech intervention without being made to feel that their concerns are being dismissed by the school, as we have reports of that happening this year. Currently, District 279 does not have mandatory diversity training for newly hired employees. Equity cannot be placed at the forefront when staff aren't trained appropriately. In previous years, AIPAC asked for the from pedagogy to policy workshop to reach all staff members in the school district, and we'd like that to be implemented again. We are looking at the district to ensure that staff are properly trained and are held accountable for implementing the equity work throughout the district. We continue to hear from families that curriculum in the classrooms are inaccurate and lack Indigenous perspective. Unfortunately, many of our families do not feel comfortable speaking out to the teachers, so they are left to reteach their children at home. Teachers also need to make sure that the corresponding classroom activities and projects are done without cultural appropriation. Families want to see more lessons about current Indigenous leaders, and they want lessons to accurately reflect Indigenous teachings. Also, our students are being singled out in class to help teach lessons about American Indians, and some feel very uncomfortable doing this as they feel they're being tokenized. Teachers need to refrain from this practice. We have spoken with a few individuals in the district regarding the ECAP stakeholder survey from February and March of 2021, and they did not include the voices of our American Indian students and families. The resulting demographics were grouped into African American, Asian, Hispanic, Latino, white, multiracial, and people of color. We were told that American Indian demographics were too small to have results published separately. If we have only one American student or family take the time to fill out the survey, then we want to know what those experiences are. The invisibility of our students and families is further perpetuated by erasing our results in the district-wide surveys. AIPAC requests that the results of American Indian students and families are individually calculated on all surveys. AIPAC had also previously requested the efforts to be made to address the invisibility of American students across the school district. This year, many of our students were disappointed that the teachers did not recognize Indigenous Peoples Day in October or Native American Heritage Month in November. AIPAC requests that we receive information from each school on how they plan to acknowledge Minnesota American Indian Month in May. AIPAC had previously requested that 11 Minnesota tribal flags be displayed at each district building. We appreciated the school district's follow through with this request in providing those flags. We were told that all schools had flags displayed. Unfortunately, our families are saying that these flags are not clearly displayed in each building. Also, some flags that are displayed on walls are not properly hung and are falling down. Our hope was that our students would see tribal flags in the buildings, and this would help reduce the invisibility that many of them feel. Displaying the flags also would help educate all students about the sovereign nations of this land that is now called Minnesota. AIPAC would like to know where the tribal flags are displayed in each building, and we would also like to know what lessons the schools are providing for all students to learn about the flags and what sovereignty means for our tribal nations. At the TNEC meeting, the Tribal Nations Educational Committee meeting in the fall, AIPAC discussed the need for the district to look into continuing to grow the Indian Education Department's staffing levels in order to better serve the growing number of students. This department connects our students and families to culture-based education programming and is invaluable for our students that are often invisible in the school system. Currently, our Indian Education Department has positions for 4 staff members. We have 1 coordinator and 3 equity specialists. that serve approximately 500 American Indian students. We were made aware that a position is now open, though, for office support, which has been needed for quite some time. To compare how other Indian Ed departments in Minnesota staff for their enrollment in approximate numbers with Osseo area schools, we have 500 students and 4 staff members. If we look at metro areas, Minneapolis, that has 1,300 students, they have 15 members. We look at St. Paul, that has 700 students. They have 11 staff members. If we go outside of the metro, we go up to Bemidji. They have 1,000 students, which is twice the size of ours, but they have 14 staff members. Duluth has 300 students with 7 staff members. So something to consider when looking at other districts. The Indian education departments have staff members hired specifically for culture and curriculum support at the district level. Indigenous social workers and counselors, they have language teachers, they have cultural teachers, and they have academic advisors to specifically serve their American Indian students. So with all that said, there's still a lot to be work to be done to better meet the needs of our American Indian students, and we look forward to continued collaboration with you.
Thank you so much. I'll open up. Does anybody, did you want to say something?
Nope, go ahead.
Okay. Does anybody have any comments or questions?
I have a question, Superintendent McIntyre. So for some of the issues raised, do we have a system in place in order to take corrective action, particularly in classroom situations? I understand many families may not feel comfortable raising the issue in their classroom, but do we have a system in place, and what type of progress has been made so that, again, it's real, that we take real-time corrective action?
Not knowing any details of those specific examples, I would say we would want to get that information and deal with that at the very localized level, at the building level, with that particular teacher through either their performance evaluation or some other corrective action. Again, I would need to know more about those details, and I'm really glad that our AIPAC committee and President Travis helps raise those issues for us. We've talked about some of those before as well, right? So there's a number of different corrective actions we can take, not only just from a content and curriculum standpoint, but maybe from a personal performance approach, right? So I don't know, Brian, you may have been in some of those conversations as well, so I don't want to speak for you.
So I think in preparing for our TNET consultation, it is clear that we have work to do. We have work to do, and we take the work seriously. We have excellent leadership in Ethan, who is mapped out what these areas for growth and improvement are for our district, and we are working on them. And we're working on them, and I think it's important that the information that was shared with us tonight just brings to our consciousness that there's still more work to do. Even though we've made some progress, and that's being acknowledged, we still have work to do. So in short, Director Simons, I think if you can give us until March, we can come back in March or at a time that Superintendent McIntyre that you feel is appropriate, and we can provide an update on what our plan is to address the feedback that was shared tonight.
Great, thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah, just a couple of questions. Jessica, a quick question just for clarification, and thank you for all of that. I tried to take as many notes as I could. You talked about the survey results and the fact that we have essentially been erasing Indigenous experiences from those surveys. Are you asking for those results to be reported separately or as a part of the comprehensive survey results?
So it can be the comprehensive survey results, but making sure that we're grouped into that, those results. Basically, I think we were put into people of color, and so then we can't specifically see what those results are for our families. And as AIPAC, we want to know what those families are experiencing, and we can't when we're grouped into another group.
Do we, and this might be more for the superintendent, but are there any limitations, legal limitations for us to report or publish that data?
I think the best answer to that, and I need to look into that further, but I know when we have sample sizes that are small with any group, we're very careful to be individually identifying any student. So I think that's the key factor here. I would need to know a little bit more about that situation, because I agree with President Travis as far as how we want to make sure we're recognizing and identifying and using those results for improvement, right? That's our whole goal. So there's probably some technical pieces here we need to unpack and make sure we can work through that, so that we can, the whole point of those surveys is to use that information and for us to get better. So
Can we?
I got notes to follow up with the board on those things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then the last one, just for staff as well, can you talk about the diversity training or the lack thereof?
Can you say that one more time? I'm sorry.
It was mentioned in the beginning, a lack of mandatory diversity training for staff, new staff members. And I'm just wondering if you could talk about what sort of training they do receive at the beginning of their careers with us, and why we don't have anything in place.
We do require equity training for all new hires, so that's where I got to dig into this further. We had our 1.0 and 1.5 training. Many board members might remember that. We did require all employees to take that. Now, COVID and many other things of, the pandemic have influenced a lot of this work, so I need to dig into that more, because if many remember, that was a requirement for all new hires. So I want to be able to follow up and maybe through Brian and President Travis, bring that information back to AIPAC so that we can make sure we have a clear plan of action moving forward.
Just for clarification, I thought that you had mentioned a specific training,
Yes, so.
and it wasn't the 1.0 or the 1.5.
Right, so a few years ago, they had the pedagogy to policy. So that was led by Ramona and Ethan at that time. And so they would bring staff. It was a 2-day course. 1 day was spent looking, doing a Badote tour and looking at the sacred sites around that area. And then another day in the classroom. And that, since COVID, hasn't been happening.
So that's different. That's a totally different
Yeah,
thing that we're talking about
I
here.
might have misunderstood your question, Director Brooks. I think you asked me for what training we offer, so I'm going to clearly follow up and make sure I get additional information from our team on ensuring that those things are happening.
Yeah, we were just informed that the onboarding, that currently there wasn't any equity work with the onboarding that's been happening in the last year or two.
Of new staff for?
Correct,
Okay.
for new staff within the district.
Okay. I'll have to look into that further, board. and need more details and kind of circle back to our team to look into what we can do to address that.
So we have training, right, that talks to teachers about, let's say, for example, Indigenous Peoples Day coming up. And our system is offering every teacher guidance on their curriculum choices that are teaching the true history of our Indigenous students. So how is this stuff still slipping through the cracks?
They aren't being taught. So students are saying, hey, they're coming home and saying, parents will ask them, what the student or what did the teacher say about it? Nothing. Wasn't even mentioned. So, kids at home know. We got families on, reservations and our local communities that get the day off to celebrate. And our kids go to school and it's not even recognized.
Is that a site decision or is it a curriculum decision?
Days off of school, is that the question?
No, to recognize Indigenous Peoples Day.
Oh, again, I want the ability to go back and make sure we have all the information and circle back. That is a concern of mine as well. So I'm not going to attempt to answer all these questions tonight, because I want to make sure I can reflect everything we're doing or need to do to address it, right?
And so when children come home and knowing their own heritage, don't see that reflected at school, do they reach out to you? Do they feel like they have a path to let the system know that there's room for improvement? I mean, tell me a little bit more about how complicated that issue is.
You know, we have families that come from boarding schools, right? So the trust in the system isn't there. You know, it's not hundreds of years ago, it's, you know, within our generation. So
Right.
we do hear about it, and the people, at least the AIPAC families is what we hear from. And so, you know, that's a smaller group of people. But if we have a small group of people that are saying it, we got a whole population of people that aren't saying anything, but we could assume feeling the same way that the students that are speaking up are feeling.
So when you have a complaint, do you feel like you have a place to get that addressed, or is it still,
Well, you know,
we gotta look back at the system rather than addressing
I mean,
an
not really. I mean,
individual
even
issue?
I think people don't know the pathway. And I can even talk about myself of when my kids were early elementary, you go to the teacher, and then all of a sudden it turns on that you're trying to make a big deal about it, and your child is then sitting there feeling completely thrown to the floor because they're being invalidated about how they're feeling about their culture and who they are as a person. So it's like it's twisted. So then if you've gone to the teacher and they do that to you, then a lot of people give up, right? So instead of saying, you know what, I'm gonna take this to the principal, all right? The principal doesn't say anything, now who do I go to? There's no clear step on doing that, and a lot of families aren't willing to do that. So you kind of just talk about it amongst each other within the community of like, this is going on, what do we do about it? And there really isn't a clear path to say, these are the, and it's not posted anywhere of like, when you have these issues, this is who you need to talk to.
I think there's,
I'm still finishing. I think that is a good point, that having a point person to talk to, and it sounds like we kind of need to review our system on this. I just want to say also to the both of you how much I appreciate the time that you spend on this and continuing to bring these issues to our attention. And I really hope that we can make some further growth on these issues together this year, because I do understand as a parent with a child that needs to be advocated for, and how easily they can feel erased, and how frustrating it is for the child's experience even to know that something's not right and not have the power to rectify that situation fully. So, thank you.
President Travis, I think, and school board members and Superintendent McIntyre, I think there's something that needs to be very clear, which is it's not incumbent in our families to tell us something's broken. It's incumbent on us to make sure that what we promise is going to be delivered is delivered. So I think we just have to be a little bit cautious in saying that you have to tell us, because we own the accountability of making sure that what we're doing is to the full expectation of what's been promised. I think it's important to have feedback loops and mechanisms, but I want to be thoughtful about how we're communicating that, because we just need to have the right mechanisms in place to ensure that we know ourselves when something's broken, and not saying we can only fix it if you tell us. So I just want to make that clarifying point. And then I thought that was really helpful benchmarking information about the staffing levels. So Superintendent McIntyre, as we think about the program and the delivery, if that's something that we can continue to do and follow up. I know in previous conversations there is a lot of learning about what other districts are doing across the state, but I think that's a really good benchmark to assess to ensure that we're delivering to the level that we need to.
I would just like to say, number one, thank you guys for both coming here tonight and presenting this information. I appreciate the vote of concurrence, but I also recognize that it's not unanimous. And I think that's appropriate, especially given the evidence presented here tonight. Truthfully, I'm actually a little bit surprised that we got a vote of concurrence with the evidence that you've brought here for us tonight. But I did have a question about the comment about families feeling like they don't have access to other services like speech, things like that, that are really required things that we need to offer to all of our students when needed. So could you elaborate on that a little bit?
I think it's the staff within the schools. You know, you have parents that are going and saying, hey, my kid, I think really needs, you know, some intervention here with speech therapy, and they kind of get brushed off, you know, so then nobody's following up. They're kind of still left. They've mentioned at the beginning of the school year, and it's now February, and they're still sitting without any interventions.
Okay. So personally, I'm sure other board members feel this way too. To me, that's a really big concern. We're required as a school district, if a parent asks for an evaluation, that we have to provide one. Whether services are needed, obviously will be determined at that evaluation. So I guess what I would ask is, and you know, kind of taking Tanya's comments into consideration, is that, and this anybody watching, regardless of what the need is, if you ask for an evaluation and it's not given, please encourage those people to reach out and keep going up
So
higher.
who do they reach out to first?
First.
Right, so this is where the contact
Yeah.
information is the issue.
Yes.
Of who do we go to?
Yeah, I think it depends on the building, but once you get out of the building, I mean, personally, I have kids who have special needs too, so for me, like, I would go straight to the top if I didn't get my evaluation within 30 days, because that's required. But people do need to know that they have options, and if you're not getting help, then just keep going up to the top, past your principal, come up to the board, come to the superintendent, whatever route that is, because that's just, to me, it's just really unacceptable that students aren't even being evaluated. It breaks my heart to hear that that's happening, because those kids deserve to have the services that they need, and parents know their kids, and they know what their needs are. So I really appreciate you bringing that up, and I'm really sorry that there have been people who've been experiencing that. That's, to me, just really, really concerning. I also really appreciated the benchmarking information about the other districts, and I would just request for maybe our board or our staff to look to, particularly Bemidji. I know that when I've attended like MSBA conferences and things like that, they are really, really intentional about the work that they're doing around their Indigenous students, and seeing that they have 1,000 kids and 14 staff members to help service those kids. I think it speaks to why they are having such great success in their programs, and I think we can look to those leaders within our state to improve upon our own system. So thank you again for bringing that forward, and for sharing all this information with us.
Jackie, did you want to say anything?
I do.
Okay.
Thank you so much for being here, Jessica and Arlene, if I may call you Jessica and Arlene. I've been really struggling so I've been a teacher for 30 years, and the educational system has been such that many families feel the way your families do, shut down, and so why even try, right? And so I do believe that it's on us to go more than halfway to make sure that we earn trust again in those particular areas. And I'm hoping that the AIPAC can help us determine who might be someone that would have a start on having a trust to be a contact person. I'm imagining that if all, and you correct me if I'm wrong or if I say something incorrectly, I would imagine, based on my experiences with many different groups, that having one, liaison to go to for everyone who's Indigenous for little things like that, or big things like that, and other little things is what I'm trying to say, and that person can help, like liaise to wherever they need to go. Is that, which I imagine is difficult with only 4 people for 500.
It would require
Right.
another staff member.
Right. So does that sound like something that would be helpful in that
Yeah,
particular
absolutely.
situation? Okay. I appreciate it. Not that you should solve all our problems, but I appreciate it. And thank you so much for your tenacity over the years and bringing this to this board so that we can attempt to make things right for our past. Thank you.
Were you gonna say something else before I say something?
I just wanted to point out, just for the rest of the board, you already know, but the RISE committee has been talking about ways that we can figure out how to create those points of contact for communities. I know that, depending on the community that you come from, the school, the culture, et cetera, I think those, initial points of contact are going to have to look different. But I know that that's sort of one thing that they've been tackling, at least recently, to get some sort of system in place for families to be able to share that feedback. I think one of the concerns that I have, and I know that, this isn't the first time that we've received a lot of this information, but as you're receiving this information, like, how is it getting to staff, and then what's happening with it? It sort of feels like, especially for these items that have come up in the past, that it's like we're hearing them for the first time again, when maybe there should have been some sort of action associated with them, based on the last report. So I think it's my goal, and I'm new to AIPAC, I still need to get caught up as a liaison, but I would like to figure out what that connection is with staff and addressing some of these issues, so that we can have a more comprehensive report, and maybe report back from staff, when you come back in the future with another vote of concurrence.
Okay, I just would like to just say, do you want to say something first?
Go ahead.
Okay. I just want to also thank you two, as well as AIPAC members, for continuing to engage in these conversations in terms of how we ensure that our scholars, our Native scholars, Indigenous scholars, and families and staff are seen and heard. And, I saw it firsthand in a committee meeting we were on together, the invisibility factor, and it really made me, somebody who I feel like I'm aware on a lot of things, just made me realize it was really humbling. And I know that one of the big changes for me as chair that I wanted to see is that, I know you come here, this month to get the concurrence, but it's really about consistency and building relationships. So not just once a year, every month, which is why Tamara and Thomas are, designated as not only TNAC, but with AIPAC as well. And I think that's very, very important because, as you mentioned, some of the, whether it's Indigenous Peoples Day or Native American Heritage Month or American Indian Heritage Month coming up, as a board too, coming from the leadership, we want to partner together to ensure that our Indigenous or Native students are fully supported, acknowledged. And so I do think that representation with board members at AIPAC that is the purpose, right? To amplify voices, to build those relationships. So it's not just once a year we're coming back and being like, wait, didn't we talk about what hasn't changed? But, and so things like, I know we've talked about whether it's bringing forth a resolution, American Indian Heritage Month, to, talking about boarding schools, and more education. Because like you said, it's just recent history. I was even talking to my mom who's from North Dakota. She's like, oh yeah, I remember that, and she's 72 and just being in. And so it just, I think across the board, we're all very committed. And so I do look forward to this next year. And then I know you two, like you mentioned, RISE, Thomas, I think that's a great intersection as well. So
thank you, and I look forward to many more conversations moving forward. And Superintendent McIntyre, I feel like you were going to say
Yeah, I would
something.
just offer up, I think it's important to continue that partnership with our leadership of AIPAC and also provide the opportunity to give you a more comprehensive presentation of the efforts and the progress made in those efforts over time. It's been said a few times, we have a long way to go. Tonight's purpose wasn't to give you that comprehensive overview of all the different components, but to highlight the things that we made progress and highlight the things we still need to improve on. And like last year, we came back about a month or two later with a deeper presentation for the board on the efforts that we're moving forward to try to address all the concerns and questions there. And I think it's wise for us to consider doing that again, just so you can see the efforts that are continuing to be put in place to improve on the long list of items that were presented tonight.
All right.
Okay.
Can we be notified when that comes back, though, so we can attend another meeting?
Absolutely. Like you have your monthly AIPAC meetings, correct, right? Bi-monthly? Remember how often?
Monthly.
Yeah, yep. So through Ethan, right, we can definitely, and through Brian, make that connection.
Okay. Thank you.
And then for the requests that we made, who will reach out to us about those requests?
I'll work with you with Ethan and Brian through those departments.
Okay, sounds good.
And if you can send us also, Corey, a copy of the letter for our reference so we can build on that, working on that.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I do, Leslie, want to invite all of you to our annual powwow this year in April. So I'm sorry, I don't have the date on me. When is the third weekend? The third weekend in April. Okay. So if you guys please would like to attend or see that, you're all welcome to come, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to ask Brian and Dwayne Wardali to come up and update the board on our Achievement and Integration Budget Review.
Right. So Dwayne has been here a few months longer than I have, so he will take the lead on the Achievement Integration Budget Review, and we'll both be available to answer any questions that you might have. So I'll turn it over to Dwayne Wardali. The mouse that makes it? Mouse, this one, yeah.
Tanya, I think you forgot to put your mask back on after meeting. Thanks. You're welcome.
My guess is Kay is coming down the hall as we speak,
Okay.
At least I wasn't thinking.
or John.
Thank you, thank you. Achievement integration.
Here.
Thank you so much. Chairperson Dawson Walton,
It's very confusing.
Vice Chair Mosqueda Jones, Director Brooks, Director Douglas, Director Simmons, Director Grady, and Superintendent McIntyre. Good evening. And it is with great pleasure that I will be
debriefing the Achievement and Integration Funds this evening.
You probably just got to scroll with the mouse. There you go.
Much appreciated. Just a few outcomes for this presentation. This evening, we're going to review our achievement and integration goals with reference to our 3-year plan. So we are actually nearing the end of the 3-year plan, and we're going to identify what changes have taken place within the budget for next year, which is 2022 and 2023. And what I want to do is provide you with a little bit of context as to where we have been for this school year and where we are for next school year. And building off of the Achievement and Integration Fund breakdown, 80% of our funds must be direct services to students. And the pie technically could be added up to 110%. Up to 20% can be used for professional development, and 10% can be used for administrative and indirect costs. You will find the breakdown to where for next year, we are staying underneath the $5 million mark in terms of staying consistent with our FY 2022 Achievement and Integration budget. In other words, we are planned for a $4.9 million Achievement and Integration budget, with a budget increase that's just over $5,000, where when we think about the specific breakdown of why the figures look as such, we need to take into account some of the reorganizing of our department for this year and some of the deep commitments of our district this year for specific departments where we have moved certain line items into our general fund. As such, we have an Achievement and Integration budget that will look very much aligned with last year's proposed or with last year's bottom line at $4.957 million, where again, for next year, we're looking at that $5,000 increase. Do know that as a part of our continued goals within our department, we are doing very deep alignment within our reorganization with our 4 strands of equity, which are the equity team, American Indian education, family and community engagement, and multilingual learning. Our 5 goals for next year will stay consistent as a part of this 3-year plan. What you will find is some adjustments to some of the language that we are going to begin introducing based on some deep research and what is learning work within our department for next year, what is implementation work, and what is standard work. So I invite you just to look at these 5 specific goals. Next to each one, you will find one of these 3 categories next to each of these 5 goals. So for Goal 1, as part of the Northwest Suburban Integrated School District, otherwise known as NWS ISD Collaborative, Osseo area schools will participate in programming seeking racial and economic integration and achievement gap closure for Osseo area school students from FY 2020 through 2023. This is work that we find consistently across each and every one of our Osseo area schools, hence the work being standard. For goal number 2, in reference to the proficiency gap between students of color, American Indian students, and white students enrolled the full academic year for all grades tested within Osseo area schools on all state math accountability tests, such as MCA, MOD, MTAS. This will decrease for all Osseo area schools within the same 3-period time. This is learning work, where what we are doing is specifically identifying across our district where we find those inconsistencies in order to address these and be much more strategic about making this aligned and applied across the district as standard work. So at this time, it is learning work. For goal 3, where we are identifying that same goal, except it is for reading accountability, we are in that same space of learning work. Goal 4, we're increasing American Indian student attendance at all grade levels for all Osseo area schools, American Indian students. Again, for the same 3-year time period. This is implementation work, where we have already, across elementary, middle, and high schools, been in the implementation phase, in particular with a number of programs, such as Check and Connect, for instance, at the high school level, where this is, again, implemented within specific sites. And again, we are working toward this goal, going towards standard work once it is implemented with fidelity. 5th goal, increasing access to effective and diverse teachers. This is also a goal that we identify as implementation work. I want to be cognizant and identify these 13 strategies that you find on your screen. And I also want to highlight that this presentation may in many ways feel familiar, simply because we are looking at a 3-year plan. And I want to just be cognizant of that when you're looking through and you say, well, I feel like I've seen this perhaps in our virtual board meeting last year. It is in part because these strategies do represent some of our standard work within our Department of Educational Equity that are connected. These 13 strategies are indeed connected to the achievement and integration budget. So these have not changed when considering last year, us being in one of the 3 years from last year's board meeting. So where we are working on racial equity and educational achievement, comprehensive district-wide math instruction and support, and comprehensive district-wide reading instruction and support, family and community engagement, otherwise referred to as FACE, magnet school programming. Our district is participating in the Northwest Suburban Integrated School District, otherwise known as NWS-ISD, sponsored student service opportunities, college and career readiness, with a focus also on historically Black colleges and universities and tribal colleges and universities. Real Talk, which is run through our equity specialists in our department and highlighting student voice. Increasing and retaining teachers of color and Indigenous teachers. Our family book club programs, again, these are run within our equity strand of our DOEE. Independent reading, level assessment, focus on fitness, and our American Indian Attendance Initiative. So identifying these strategies as standard work as a part of our department. This, in essence, summarizes the Achievement and Integration Fund plan for this evening. So I wanted to have you just review very quickly and provide the space to take any of your questions.
All right, thank you. Does anybody have any comments or questions? Director Brooks?
Sorry, quick question from me. Can you explain what 11 and 12 are in the list?
Absolutely. So I'll start with 12 first. We have had a number of initiatives over the time that we have rolled out this 3-year plan. And our initiatives at times are run within a specific team, and within other moments have been led through specific equity specialists. This focus on fitness was one program that took place in the first year of our 3-year implementation, which involved engagement and the seeking to increase student engagement within specific grade levels, and having a fitness focused program. At this time, within this school year, we have, based on the background that I have received, we have not implemented this with Fidelity as standard work, number 12, as a program, as opposed to when it was launched at the beginning of the 3-year plan. With reference to independent reading level assessments, this took place as one of our specific strategies at the very beginning as well of our 3-year plan. One of the goals in being in month 5 of my leadership is to ensure that we are doing an inventory, right, of our specific strategies. We are being mindful of where we stand now that we are in this stage of the winter of 2022, given that we've had to move to remote learning, given that we've now moved out of remote learning, given where we are going as a department, and ensuring engagement for our students. So I appreciate you bringing forth these 2 points where I can look to research and provide more context as to whether these 2 programs need to be a part of our 22-23 plan in the same way that we identified in 2020. I hope that provides a little bit of context, and again, just
Definitely.
being relevant as possible for the strategic use of our achievement and integration funds.
I definitely appreciate that. Out of the 13, those were the 2 that I was like, not quite sure what those are, so thank you. More of just a comment, number 7, college and career readiness with HBCUs. My middle school daughter came home yesterday talking about HBCUs, so it's actually a kind of a big deal to me because I've told both of my kids that I wish I would have made that decision to go to one when I was younger. So yeah, I guess one of the questions I have is how are we generally, you don't have to go into a ton of detail, but how are we measuring readiness? And then do we have any sort of idea of how many of our scholars are choosing HBCUs?
Thank you, Director Brooks. So I'm going to break down this question into sort of 2 parts. One of them being one of our pride points within our department is really to use qualitative and quantitative data when making impactful decisions, again, and thinking about how we strategically use our achievement and integration funds for direct student services. And with the reorganization of our department, we've had a number of cross-collaborative conversations about what is missing in terms of our student experience. And we actually held our first virtual HBCU fair this fall, which was a tremendous success across our high schools within the district, in order to, again, highlight where we have fallen short and where we can be responsive based on qualitative and quantitative data to our student needs. So while there might be one point where we might say, hey, maybe we need to press pause in terms of its standard implementation or learning implementation, we have found that by bringing in this lens with our HBCUs and using qualitative data in this case, that our CWCs have been really responsive and have had a really positive interaction with our equity department and participating in this fair, to where we are seeking to do a collaborative spring HBCU and TCU fair. Again, as we seek to really uplift and highlight the voices of each and every one of our students. And in this instance, really highlight what resources, what colleges and universities are available that are outside of our state colleges and universities or private institutions and Ivy League institutions. So this was, I would say, in thinking about how the decision was made, it was made with a lot of qualitative data, with our team really being plugged in to the school stories and our student voices. The second part of your question, remind me one more time.
I'm just wondering if we had any sort of idea of how many of our scholars are selecting HBCUs.
So, yeah, no, and I appreciate that. As I speak about data, we haven't gotten within the DOEE to collecting that data. That said, as we collaborate across the DLTL, our department of, within our district, as we connect with learning and achievement and their college and career readiness department, it could be one of our goals to collect that quantitative data and see where we are, for instance, this year and at the end of next year, so that we are really able to gauge how this is having a positive impact with our student body.
Can I just add something? I have looked extensively into HBCUs, what our district offers, because I have a junior, and she wants to go to an HBCU. And I have to give a shout out to Sarah Schreiner from Park Center, the career resource specialist, hugely. And also Mercedes from ASIO. They have done a phenomenal job of going above and beyond and connecting with HBCUs. And I really, what I encourage, and I talked to Superintendent McIntyre, all three of our schools need to be doing that because we'd also, have students at Maple Grove that may be interested in HBCUs, and so I know they opened it up all the way, but I think the promotion and kind of just, making sure it's pretty prominent in the Career Resource Center also in all three of our high schools for these opportunities. And I know they're continuing to kind of to refine it and do more work. So I think the one I know the most is the Park Center has just done a phenomenal job of, and I think, in fact, I think last week they had an event as well, a college event, anyway, so I just have to say that with that. And I love the fact that they've, tried to include the alumni coming through that have gone. I think that's really, really, really important, so.
I appreciate that. I'll definitely bring the feedback on my end to our coordinator, one of our coordinators, Mercedes Henderson Clark, and I think about even a conversation that I had the opportunity to be a part of at one of our high schools where, again, it was about connecting that experience of our students when we think about who our students are, connecting a personal experience to what our lived experiences for our juniors, our seniors, can look like by connecting specific alumni networks with, again, a representation of a variety of colleges and universities, post-secondary options for our students. So thank you for that.
All right, anybody else?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Just while we're on the subject of college and career readiness, sadly, a sentiment that has been expressed to me more frequently recently has been from our Hispanic communities feeling that they don't really have a place that they belong in certain areas, and sometimes they feel like they're not counted as a person of color. And that's a concern for me. And I see here, we have the HBCUs, which is great, and the TCUs, which is great, but we don't have HSIs. Can you talk about that?
I appreciate you bringing that to my attention. And again, our responsibility as a department is to ensure that each and every one of our students, their experiences, their identity and/or identities are represented and heard and seen in order for those to be lived. So I will ensure that I look into that. I appreciate you bringing that up, Director Douglas. In order for us, again, in this sort of year zero of our department being reorganized, to ensure that we are being entirely inclusive of our student community. Thank you.
Yeah, I just said, thank you very much for the presentation. I noticed that professional development went down a lot from the 22 to 23. Is that something that's going to shift as we go forward? It's on that first one.
Thank you for bringing that up, Director Grady. In part, we have, again, had some really deep commitment in terms of funding changes and shifts within our department, which has, in part, shifted what the pie looks like. I will tell you that it is not, I would not take the apparent decrease in professional development as a reduction in opportunities that our department has for internal and external opportunities, but more that we have been able to be embedded in our district across the achievement and integration budget and other budgets that could be state, federal, and or general funding. So one of the deep commitments, and I think about what you've just shared, Director Douglas, in terms of HSIs, for instance, we want to ensure that, again, we are being proactive as a department and uplifting and recognizing the voices of each and every. So our commitment to professional development is deep, and it might not be reflected just based on how we are optimizing funding streams.
Okay, thank you. I mean,
Thank you.
the bottom line is that you've increased the percentage of, and the absolute amount of money that is being spent on direct services to students, and that's the most important thing. I was just curious about that aspect of things. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, this is really helpful. I think one thing that would help me think about this going forward would be to understand this through the lens of aligning with our strategic plan. I think that's something that we want to kind of, I'm guessing that's in the works to think about it through that lens, but really every time that we hear kind of what our key strategies are, how that's lining up with our strategic plan, and what we're learning about where we're reducing our efforts because maybe it has less of an impact. And so I look at like the 13 things, and where are the ones that are really kind of where we're getting the most return on, or where we're hearing the most feedback, whether it's from the student perspective or the family perspective. And I know certainly from the core, there's going to be a lot of the instruction support as kind of the core element of closing the achievement gap, but the other strategies that come in and support that. So it'd be helpful for me to kind of think about that in terms of what we're continuing to even deepen our investment in, perhaps, because we're getting and seeing the results. I think it's great to see the full surround, but just helping to contextualize that a bit more into alignment with the strategic plan and where we're focusing our efforts and investment would be helpful going forward. But it was great to kind of see a broad overview of this.
Thank you, Director Simons. And I think about just how we are naming the learning, implementation, and standard work by way of this year being a way of looking deeply at what our practices have been and what we need to deepen based on our department having various touch points that are within our schools, and how we need to tweak, again, just in thinking about this model with college and career, how we need to tweak some of our approaches to some of our voices that we've heard via the ECAP process, but also just via the different members of our department who are able to represent their students via the standard work that will represent our equity work as consistent within our district. So we're doing a lot of assessment. We're making some changes in this first year, and I would say just expect within the next moment when I am up here to be able to speak to a number of those 5 strategic bullet points of our roadmap. I think in particular about the equitable outcomes. I think about number 5 in particular, and we are laser focused on really operationalizing our 3-year equity plan to meet the needs of our students. So while it may not be fully apparent with a plan that was in place for 3 years, we are definitely attuned to our student voice as being paramount in this work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Director Simons, if I may just jump in, you beat me to it. Maybe you saw in the last couple updates, as we've done department updates, an intentional alignment to the strategic directions in our work. So some are in the process of realigning. I know in talking with Brian, our departments are creating those departmental plans that really will drive the school improvement plans at the site level, right? So we're in that process of driving from the roadmap to the strategic directions into the department and school improvement plans. And we're right in the middle of that work. So as we move forward, you're going to get more and more updates around how do we align our work specifically to those strategic directions. So I was going to bring that up, and you and I were thinking the same thing.
All right, thank you.
Dr. Mosqueda, were you going to say something?
I just want to say I appreciate both of you having to come into a plan that's already in place and try to navigate it. And I'm really looking forward to seeing where your leadership will go for the next iteration and rounding out the rest of this particular plan. I am very excited about it, so thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair.
I just want to add that when I look at these strategies and the goals, I mean, I think they're so in line with where we're going with our strategic priorities. This is exactly kind of living living them out in real time. I think about all the strategies that some of them I'm familiar with, some of them are not, but I even think Real Talk and I can see the impact in our schools with that program in itself. My one question, and of course FACE, I mean, that's something that I think the entire board is super supportive of just ensuring that families are engaged and we're lifting up our voices. I did have a question about, and it just made me think when Jessica and Arlene were here, they mentioned tutoring. And I find, even for my own children, like if I try to go to like Huntington or all these places that are supposed to be the top, they are extremely, extremely cost prohibitive, like holy buckets. And I have 4 kids, so do we, have we ever considered partnering with something, or when it comes to tutoring, and they had just mentioned it, and it just got me thinking, and I know this is all about direct service, but.
I know that we have a concrete example of, again, just some alignment and cross-coordination across our departments and identifying members within within Learning and Achievement who have plugged in students of ours based on parent requests at specific schools to have site-based tutoring. So of really just making some intentional connections for specific students. And I'm wondering if I can bring this ask back also to the department and thinking about how, if this is indeed a concern, how this could perhaps be included in that operationalizing of the equity plan. Because again, while we have connected the dots for a few students, how do we make this perhaps a part of our standard work?
That'd be great, thank you.
So we did hear that feedback from AIPAC, and then Ethan had in his debriefing of Dwayne and I, and sharing some patterns around that. So it's learning work for us to go back and understand what potential agencies we could partner with to provide that support. So it definitely represents learning work for us.
All right, well, thank you both so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. It's great.
Right, Chair Dawson Moulton. Next, we have our long-range financial planning, LRFP, and capital budget update with John Banusa, our Executive Director of Finance and Operations, and Kelly Banusa. Did I say John Banusa?
You did.
At least I caught it. John Morstead, Executive Director of Finance and
There's
Operations.
something we should know.
At least I didn't say Superintendent McGuire, right, Tim?
Right?
And Kelly Banusa, Director of Business Services. Thank you both for your patience, and I'll turn it right over to John.
That's all right. I'm pretty sure I called the board chair superintendent a meeting or two ago, so. So good evening, Chair Dawson Walton, Superintendent McIntyre, and board members. This evening's conversation around our fiscal year 23 budget will be divided into 3 parts. A quick general overview of our budgeting process, review of budgeting adjustment proposals, including any strategic investments that are being brought forward for consideration, and capital budget requests. I'll be referring to your packet just because some of the text that we'll be looking at is pretty small, so just to make sure you're following along. So starting on page 9 of your board packet is a diagram that may be familiar to most of you. This is the long-range financial planning, or LRFP model that our district uses, which holds 2 purposes: a solid data-driven and collaborative budgeting process, as well as a comprehensive financial projection tool. A few things I'd like to point out in this diagram. First, as always, the mission is in the center. This is especially important as we make proposals and how we allocate our limited resources throughout the system, that we need to stay focused on the mission. The gray ovals around the mission represent our work as staff, particularly our budget managers, and what they are doing throughout the year to develop budget proposals based on those strategic priorities of the district and the guidance of the school board. The teal boxes on the outside represent the school board's role in the process. Tonight we are preparing for work that you will see in the box on the left side of the diagram, specifically for the board to approve the budget adjustments that are being brought forward and that have gone through the extensive LRFP process. And the final item to highlight is the box on the top right side, which is the guiding principles that we use through the LRFP process. The next page, number 10 in your packet, is an overview of our budget adjustment process and how these requests will come forward. As I stated earlier, all budget requests that come forward should align and support the district's mission and strategic directions. Each proposal, as you will see down to number 6 on the page, would need to be proposed and evaluated using the PAIR process, or Program Efficiency, Abandonment, and Redirection. This ensures that there is an intentional process for evaluating the impact of a proposed budget adjustment. Also, based on guidance from the school board back in October, all budget requests should have been brought forward with a cost-neutral effect, meaning that any proposed increase in budget capacity in a particular area, there should be an offsetting budget reduction in another area based on an extensive prioritization process as determined by each budget manager. The exception to this requirement, which was introduced about 2 years ago into the budget process, is an element called strategic investment. This is a proposal that does not have a budget reduction offset, but because of the potential impact of that request on the mission and strategic direction, the board would be asked to consider using fund balance to permanently fund such requests. You will see a couple of these strategic investment proposals a little farther in the process. The last item to draw your attention to here is number 7, which highlights the fact that these budget requests go through our LRFP advisory group, which includes community members for feedback and evaluation of each of the proposals. And we'll go through some of that feedback a little later. Next, page 11 in the packet is an annual timeline of our budget process. Our process starts in April every year in the pre-planning phase and ends in June of the following year, with the school board approving the budget. You can see there are multiple touch points of various staff and stakeholder groups, which demonstrates the collaborative nature of the process. As you also notice, the school board has 9 different touch points through the process. both to keep you informed as well as for you to provide direction and make decisions. As you're looking at the list here, the key items highlighted in blue are where the school board would be taking action. And at this point, I will like to introduce Kelly Benusa, our Director of Business Services, who will walk us through some of the base financial information related to the budget process.
So the next item in your packet is the fiscal year 22 adopted expenditure budgets for all budgeted funds. So long-range financial planning was a process that was designed about 10 years ago. We utilize this process for all budgeted funds, with the exception of the debt service fund, which is shown in the orange section. The pie chart shows the size of the funds in relation to each other. Our budget is $330.4 million, which is budgeted for at the beginning of fiscal year 22. It does not include grants like compensatory or Title I or our ESSER dollars. And we bring these budgets to the board monthly as grant approval is given from the granting entity, whether it be federal, state, or local sources. And then as of January, there was an additional $43 million in the general operating transportation fund alone in these types of grants. And overall, we have $59 million to date. The next document is the estimated major cost driver document. And just to orient everyone to this spreadsheet, at the top of this document, we have our expenditures by categories: salaries, benefits, purchase services, supplies, and others, to total $268 million for the 22 adopted budget. And then we have our changes for 23, and then the percent that is changing. So the planning assumption is 3% increase for the fiscal year 23 adopted expenditure budget. This is a starting point for our expenditures, and we use our prior year trend. For fiscal year 23, we fill in this document as information becomes available. And at this point in time, we're at 2.37% obligated of the 3%, which has been identified. And this is similar to previous years. The next document in your packet is the base and tactic recommended adjustments for the General Operating Transportation Fund. This document is dated November 8th. And from a historical perspective, this was a strategic priority. So again, that priority had two goals or outcomes for long-range financial planning. The first one was to build a framework, which was the first document that John referred to. And the second was then to design a long-range financial forecast model, which is this document. The format is the same for all of our funds. We use 9 years of data, 4 years back, the current year, and then 4 years forward. The base is in blue, and it shows if we do nothing. And then the tactics, which is in gray, utilize revenue and expenditure tactics to impact that long-term budget forecast. So we update this document at key points in the process, at our budget adoption in June, when we have our year-end audit results, and levy in October and November. And then we update it for our 5-year enrollment projections and our mid-year budget adjustments, which usually occur in February. This document was revised November 1st for enrollment due to student recapture being less than projected for 23. So a little bit about this document. I just want to walk through the yellow highlights. Again, in the top yellow highlighted area, it's referring to our revenue for our basic formula increase, which was known for 2.45% increase in 22, and then a 2% increase in 23 for the basic formula allowance. And then we have the student recapture being below our projection, and that's only a one-time loss of $1.2 million deficit. And then moving down into the enrollment, we were recapturing some of the expenditures that were approved in the long-range financial process because of that enrollment not being where it was projected. So recapturing $2.1 million. And then the next highlighted area is ADSES. And this is a program that we're paying for through federal funds for fiscal year 22 and 23. And then we were going to add the expenditures back for any remaining that's not covered by revenue in 24. And we also are sustaining programs and services in this model with federal funds for 23 and 24, and then adding back those expenditures for 25. And that's $9.4 million for 23 and 24. So the base combined reductions show $30 million of reductions would be needed over the next 4 years. That would be including 23. However, when we look at the tactics, the combined reductions are $11 million with no reductions in '23. Now I just want to move over to the next document in your packet. And again, this is a base and recommended tactic that's been updated as of February 15th. And it was updated for the January 5th, the 5-year enrollment. And so that's included in this projection, as well as it's been adjusted now for ADSES, because you're going to see ADSES come through the long-range financial process. And so that pushes our ADSES amount that we have to pay for with the general fund out to 25. And so the strategic investment that you'll see tonight is now included in this document of $1.1 million, and then that carries forward throughout and isn't reduced at a future date. And again, the impact using these tactics is combined reductions that now increase to $13 million rather than $11 million for 24 through 26, or an additional $2 million from our previous estimates. And with that, I'll turn it back over to John.
All right, as we mentioned earlier, in the budget adjustment proposal or strategic investment proposal need to go through the pair process to ensure consistency in the evaluation process. Pages 16 and 17 of the board packet, you'll see a blank version of this document that the budget managers complete. Included are questions about the intended impact of the proposal, how the proposal aligns with the strategic plan, how the proposal aligns with our racial equity work, how the budget manager is going to measure the effectiveness of the proposal, what impacts it may have on other departments, and what legal or school board policies may be affected by the proposal. Once the proposal is complete, the pair goes through evaluation within its originating department, and then through all the budget managers district-wide, and finally through the LRFP advisory team, which, as I mentioned earlier, includes some community members for feedback. At any point during the evaluation period, the budget managers can adjust their requests based on feedback from these various groups. Starting on page 18, you will see a summary of all the budget requests for fiscal year 23. The first section represents recommendations for the general fund broken down by instructional and non-instructional categories. As we mentioned before, we are operating on a zero-based budget, and all of our costs are cost neutral. However, here you see roughly $2.4 million. In the interest of transparency, we actually also included any costs that would be picked up by the ESSER 3 learning loss grant. So this $2.4 million is 100% covered by that learning loss grant for fiscal year 23, and we would have a similar amount available for fiscal year 24. I just wanted to be able to show you within the detail of where those pieces are going. The middle section here actually outlines the strategic investments, and also to provide, in the bottom section, flexibility for increased enrollment next year, and to again ensure that we can provide the same level of services we have this year. We have a proposal for a staffing contingency that would only be allocated if enrollment warrants. Starting on page 19, you're going to see a line-by-line list of proposals, including the summary as provided by each budget manager. It's a really small print, so I'm going to kind of hit the highlights here really quick. Starting with community engagement, request for a 1.0 FTE early childhood screening teacher for 1 year only to catch up on the backlog caused by COVID. Again, this is funded through learning loss with ESSER 3. Moving into the DLTL division, Division of Leadership, Teaching and Learning. There's combinations of things here that add up to just under 37 FTE increase, and then there's some decreases as well within special ed as they're making some program adjustments. Grand total of $2,311,000 and change, again picked up all by learning loss. Next is Human and Administrative Resource Team, or HART. The primary request here is the restructuring of the risk management department to better support the increasing needs throughout the district. It is a cost-neutral proposal with the addition of an assistant director, the reduction of a coordinator, and then picking up some casual pay within transportation that wasn't being used to offset the cost difference. And the final piece is within Instructional and Informational Technology Team, or I2T2. Another cost-neutral proposal, which will move 9 FTE technology ESP positions from 10 months to 12 months to better support the district, with the reduction in casual salaries to offset that cost. Now I would like to direct you to page 20, which will highlight the strategic investment requests from each division. Make sure I got the right page up. Yep, I do. Okay. Starting with community engagement again, the addition of a 1.0 AESP position at the enrollment center to cover the increased and also a small fee coverage for the student exchange visitor program, SEVP. Just something that came that they had to increase costs and asked to include that, especially with the increase in the needs and enrollment with 279 online, where we're seeing a capacity need within enrollment. Division of Leadership, Teaching, and Learning, add 3 FTEs for the various FACE leadership team and a supply budget allocation for them, so they would be moved out of ESSER funding and into general fund. Add 12 FTE year-round multilingual communication specialists, and eliminate 12 FTE of the bilingual assistants. So essentially creating a year-round position rather than a school year position for each of those 12 to support across the buildings. Again, in HEART, add 1.0 FTE recruitment and retention partner to help with the obvious recruitment and retention needs that we currently have as a district. Adding a 1.0 FTE risk management specialist, again, to help support the increased needs coming from risk management throughout the buildings. Add 3 FTEs of the ESP position to support and mentor professional development for all FTEs in buildings throughout the district. And finally, add a 0.5 FTE custodian to Rice Lake for supporting the 17,000 square foot addition that's just opening. In grand total, these strategic investments are just under $1.15 million. Oops. Sorry, I got to get out of my pages here. Pages 21 and 22, you'll see the color-coded results of the feedback from our LRFP advisory team, which includes members of the community. Green represents positive or neutral feedback. Yellow represents areas of concern, and if there was red, it would represent a perspective that the proposal may have a negative impact. Proposals evaluated this year were primarily seen as positive or neutral, with a few areas of concern. Specific feedback was given to each budget manager at the conclusion of the LRFP advisory meeting, and again, there were opportunities to adjust if necessary. So that will complete our review of the budget adjustment process. So we're going to move towards capital budget review, and I will bring Kelly back up to walk us through the basics of that.
Okay, so this next item is the base and recommended tactics for the capital fund. We use a zero-based budget approach, meaning that every request needed has to have a request behind it. Our assumptions for this fund is a 0% revenue increase and a 0% expenditure increase, because most of the items are purchased one time. However, for salaries and benefits, we have a 3% increase on those items. And so again, just to walk a little bit through this document, down on the bottom left-hand corner, where there's an arrow, it's pointing to a 10% minimum fund balance, so that's what we're managing to. We won't let this fund go below 10%. If we head down that 23 column, which is kind of in the middle of your page, and we go down to the tactics related to expenditures in the gray, the last item talks about operational increases. Because our fund balance is quite healthy in this fund, we were adding $400,000 of expenditure capacity in this budget cycle for 23 that we'll be seeing shortly, which would still leave us a healthy fund balance of 33%. And then we're managing this fund down to 11.73% at the end of 26. So you can see that it's coming in closer to that 10%. And the last time this document was updated was back in October. With that, I'll turn it back over to John.
Okay, so just like with the LRFP budget adjustment proposals, you'll see capital request proposals categorized by each division. Starts on page 24 of the packet. Starting with DLTL, just under $4 million. Capital requests including replacement of maintenance and athletic and activity uniforms, music instruments, a wide variety of curriculum needs to maintain and update current curriculum resources. I would point out, especially with curriculum, that there is a large number of state requirement changes that are coming into play with the next year that will take a lot of this. I believe in the past, we were looking at roughly 2 million towards curriculum, so that number is north of 3 million this year to meet those needs. And also capital allocations for equipment replacement and allocations to the buildings. In the human and administrative resource team, 4.5 million. Primarily to maintain our lease commitments for instructional spaces, athletic facilities, where we do our commencement, some flex room projects, equipment, camera installation systems, and so on. Things that when we can make take advantage of being able to use leasing to make purchases and spread that out a little bit, we've been able to do that. And so we have commitments that typically run between 1 and 3 years to pay off those leases. There's also some contingencies for equipment, special assessments, insurance deductibles, and risk management, software licensing for safety and security systems, and we're also adding some digital radios and doing some minor stadium improvements. In the instructional and information technology team category, $1,080,000, primarily to maintain software licenses and replace technology equipment, sound systems, and the school notification system. So capital as a whole, you're looking at a grand total of $9,992,549. And then we will look at the capital projects technology levy, page 27 and 28.
I don't have I know this is kind of halfway through, but there's no packet, right? Like
What's that?
we don't have a packet. You keep referencing.
Just digital.
Oh,
You just have
the digital
it's digital, yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
The capital projects tech levy, essentially all the dollars here, the $8,326,000 and change, will all be used to maintain current technology systems, staffing, and resources. Our next steps in the budget process include bringing forward the FY23 budget adjustments and FY23 capital budget to the board for approval at the February 22nd board meeting. And with that, we will turn it back to Chair Dawson Walton for questions.
Okay. Questions, comments?
Yes.
Okay.
I saw there was, thank you for the report, as always. Before I forget, I saw there were some adjustments made to the FACE team. And given the conversation we just had at the start of this meeting, with the need for improvement as it relates to community engagement and liaisons, I'm wondering how and if that was factored in there, because I'm not seeing anything specific to increasing the number of liaisons that we have on staff, particularly with the FACE team.
So realistically, with this proposal, we can only address what was brought forward to us by each of the divisions. And the only pieces that came forward specifically regarding the FACE team was to do that as that strategic investment and to move it. Right now, they've been kind of bouncing from last year and this year as a grant-funded program.
Mm-hmm.
Grants have an end, almost always. So what we wanted to do, because it was a priority, is get that within the general fund permanently. So it's to essentially solidify that program so we know that's in base. And then I think obviously with the team there, they'll be working on proposals to bring next steps to that based on the feedback and information that came as an example today.
Okay.
But great question.
Another thing that caught my eye a little earlier on, and this is maybe just a lack of understanding of the contracts, but there was is that 41% projected change for fuel? And then I was just wondering, but is that related to the change in learning models? Like, why is that so significant?
Do you want to?
You're referring to the cost drivers?
This
So
is
on
the,
yeah,
yes, the
so on
cost driver
on the
document.
cost driver document, let me just. There we go, it's this document. And the 41%, there's a little note next to that 41%, that it's coming from the consumer price index. And so that's what is currently projected for fuel to be increasing is 41%.
Okay, and that is, how does that relate to the transportation line
How does that relate to?
above it?
It doesn't. The transportation line, there's a little, yeah, okay, let me explain the document a little bit further. So on the far right-hand side, there are some letters, and then those letters are highlighted down below with an explanation. So for instance, the A's are referring to the health insurance, and then the B is relating to the transportation contract. So that's the increase in the contract for 23, 24, and 25. So you'll see that next year and the following year when we bring this cost driver forward. And then the C items are the known, or the increase for the consumer price index. And the last report that was available when I completed this document was December of 2021. So that was the last time we had a consumer price index.
So I think what I'm asking on that is, are we paying for fuel separately from the transportation contract?
That's not fuel for buses, that's fuel for our buildings.
Got it. Okay.
It's heating fuel.
That's what I needed to know.
Okay,
All right.
sorry,
Thank you.
I
Thank
misunderstood.
you.
I could have made that a lot shorter. All right, thank you.
That's all I have
All right, got it.
for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you for your report. I just had a question. You went by it and I missed it. You said something about the $3 million with curriculum and that'll change over time, either amount and/or budget category?
Yeah, so curriculum adoption comes on a cycle, and typically that team, and there are experts here if need be, are running on about a 7-year plan. So it has, peaks and valleys to it. It just so happens that next year has a lot of adoptions because the state, even with COVID, they actually delayed some things and they're all piling onto next year. So as an example, there are, normally you see, a science adoption just at secondary. Well, next year it's a science adoption at elementary, middle school, and secondary because it got slowed and piled together. So in doing that, we have to provide the resources so that team can be able to meet the standard the state is pushing out.
Okay.
So next year is a good example of kind of a higher amount of money needed for curriculum, and then obviously we evaluate that year over year to make sure that those needs are there for them.
Right, and do I understand correctly here, the technology things are mostly to maintain the system that we have right now, as well as absorb the additional cost for maintenance and/or, firewalls or?
Correct. We build in a replacement schedule into that, this budget. So we're doing the regular replacement. We're making payments on devices that we purchased. The devices are also on a replacement schedule, so they're rolling in. So essentially, it's kind of maintaining the status quo because this particular, the Capital Projects Technology Fund grows as our net tax capacity of our district grows. So essentially, as the value of the district grows, this fund went up from this year to the next year by roughly $500,000 just because of that increase in the values of the property. And we use that to help cover the offset of increased pricing and then maintaining the current systems that we have.
Okay, and then I just also want to point out here that we're also continuing to invest in security mechanisms for all of our schools. So just
Correct, and trying to
continual-
expand those, yep.
Okay, thank you.
So one of the proposals here is to start by adding, we would like to add digital radios to all schools, but it's a large expense. So we're trying to start it in 2 schools at a time. But obviously that would take 15 years or so for us to pull that off. So we need to get started somewhere. So this proposal at least gets the ball rolling, and then we'll work on it from there.
Those digital radios, I'm sure will look state-of-the-art 15 years from now.
Comparatively, yes.
Thank you.
I have a question about the student services pair. I was hoping to find out, and this is probably not a John question, but I'm noticing adding 5 FTE building coordinators and reducing 3 special ed teachers and 6 ESPs. I'm wondering how many of those are currently not filled anyway. And then I'm also wondering what that's going to look like what's that gonna look like as far as like to students in the building or to teachers in the building?
So the reduction isn't in special ed teachers per se. It is because of the work that we've been doing with equity and the students that we have been putting into our self-contained behavioral programs. And I believe because of the work that we've been doing with equity and the work at the sites to provide services to all children, that we have been able to reduce the number of students in our strategies programs. That doesn't mean that students don't continue to have needs or that we don't provide the continuum of services, because we still have that program at each of our levels. We just don't need the same number of classrooms at each of those levels. So we will be reducing one strategies program at the elementary, one strategies program at the middle, and one strategies program at the high school. There are associated ESP staff that go along with staffing each of those, and then to capture that staffing and then to provide supports in our elementaries with special ed building coordinators, which are teachers on special assignments. And that position is at every one of our secondary buildings, and our elementaries haven't had the benefit of that kind of support on the ground at their site. So because of this really good work that we've been doing, we are now able to capture this and then turn it into a different kind of support for our sites.
Describe what a building coordinator does.
I knew it. Yes. And I just had, it is, so a special ed building coordinator there, it's 1.0 at every one of our middle and high schools, and some of our high schools have more than that. And it is more the due process and behavioral support that is provided to our special education teams at the sites. So for example, some of you might have known Penny Newell. She's always my star example, and no disrespect to all the other SABCs out there, but I always use Penny. So Penny was the department lead at her building, and then when people were struggling on how to write an IP, should I have this goal, that goal, she was there to help them refine what it is, the proposals that we were presenting to parents, so that they were more clearly understandable and measurable and so on, so that when we were presenting a proposal that it was clearer to the parents. And if there were students that were struggling, often I would go into her office and there a student would be. It doesn't mean our social workers aren't also doing that kind of work, but an SABC at the building is also developing relationships with students with services. They help with registration. They help with enrollment. They help with getting kids to be at the right place at the right time. They're really a support to the building administration and to the special ed team. They generally have good knowledge of special ed due process, as well as what can we do to support a student. Sometimes we get mired in what we can't do. And SEBCs, we work with them very closely to see what we can do, and then they give that information to their teams.
Would you say that, are they usually more experienced
Yes.
teachers? So there's a bit of a mentorship
Yes.
piece to that. Cool, thanks.
And that's, thank you, because if I were to think of Penny, I would think of her a mentor extraordinaire. Yes.
Thank you.
So I have some concerns about how we're talking about strategic investments. So when we began to think about this incremental investment, we talked about one-time funding to innovate, to experiment, to invest, and then to come back and assess, and then determine if that's going to go into the operational budget, and then we'll have to make choices about how to fund that on a sustaining basis. So I'm a little concerned about how we're talking about strategic investments to begin with. So I see in the strategic investments there's a couple of one-time needs. So I'm not saying that they're not necessary, but they're an operational need, either one-time or ongoing in some of this list. So I think we need to continue to think about how we look at these incremental costs and use the term strategic investments as we're choice-making in budgets. I see the investment in FACE, and Last year, we did say this was something that we wanted to invest in, but I haven't seen anything that has come back and said, this was the purpose, this was the goals, we've achieved those goals, and now we want to make this incremental investment. To me, I feel I would need that in order to support additional investment. I'm not saying that these aren't good choices or good investments, it's just that I don't have that information to necessarily say that it's met the expectations that we set out to do, and there's the evidence of continued investment in that. So that would be helpful to me, because we could do different things with that investment as well, or to ensure that it's sustaining, we're evaluating, and then we're choice making. So that's just something I think we need to continue to evaluate going forward. So that's my feedback on that process and what I'm seeing in these numbers.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just reflecting on that as well. As we're looking at this, a lot of these are people positions, they're FTEs, which I think is something that we hear over and over again. We need more people in whatever area that it is. But I'm kind of wondering about the process behind how some of these came here, why they got on here, and which of these, like, I guess what I'm really asking is how much, what is the ongoing cost if we were to just say, yes, all of these things are needs and we want to support this? What is the ongoing cost? What does that look like? Because some of these, particularly people positions, I'm not real fond of supporting initiatives where we're hiring people and then letting them go a year later.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. And obviously, in the school district, we're a people business. 85+% of everything we spend $1 on is people. These proposals, as Kelly had pointed out in one of the basic tactics, are built into that, including all the ongoing costs to still achieve the budget recommendation of at least 5%. So we have built that in and know that we can sustain that going forward. However, as you see, there's always reductions at the end. And prior to us putting that in and making a few of those changes, those reductions were about 11 million. So over the course of the 4 out years, it ends up being $2 million more. You'll see that 1.1 will eventually become about 2. And so that's where we have to make those strategic decisions to say, in order to continue that, there have to be some reductions somewhere else in order to make the system, keep the system functional. So we know that's built into it, and it's I guess when you're looking at strategic investment, we're looking at what is that investment and direction that we need much more in the current time and in this next year, and then have to make those decisions going forward. And again, I'd support what Tanya said. We need to be able to evaluate those things and say, yes, this should continue, or no, it shouldn't. But also to your point of, we can't hire, you look at the work that the FACE team does, and those are some incredible people, and we can't hire those people and go, well, we might have you for next year, I don't know. We would never get them. We just wouldn't fill the position. So it becomes a calculated risk. And that's just one of the decisions that we need, where we need direction from the board to say, take that strategic risk, and then we'll figure it out as we go. If that we want to continue that, or we'll evaluate it as we go to make sure we are doing the right thing. Is that fair?
Look, can I just maybe add into that, just to try to add a little context? I want to stress that this LRFP process is annual. We review this every year, so these positions don't go on in perpetuity necessarily, right? They'll be reevaluated next year along with every other thing that gets reevaluated, and I think there's 50 or 60 people or beyond that this work represents their collective focus in really drilling this down and prioritizing the things they believe the system needs the most. And I think my recommendation is I know how hard this was for them because there's a lot more needs and wants than we have to stay relatively close to that zero-based approach. So this pushes us past that, but the leaders in our system have said to really move forward our strategic work, and really we've tried to listen to the requests of the board over time. Almost every one of these things on here, maybe minus a certification fee that we didn't know was going to end up being a change, it's $1,100, $1,200, but the rest of those have been things that have been at least communicated that supports are needed. Though maybe the only other one that was a little bit of a surprise is the enrollment center support. But as I think you saw in many of my updates to the board, the volume of mobility moving in and out of the enrollment center, even though we had a net minor loss in enrollment, a lot more movement was happening, which really tested the capacity of the team there, right? So to be able to have that be a good experience from a customer service standpoint and be quickly processing, we need additional support there. Otherwise, development of ESPs, our multilingual communication specialists, recruitment and retention, family and community engagement. These are themes that have come up time and time and time again that I'm grateful for the team's work to really get to how to prioritize these things, because if you went down every department, they all have things they would love to have and still stay within our budget, and we're still deficit spending on the projections as we look out. And we also know that ESSER fundings, that's going to go off as well. Probably is a great transition into our next topic with referendum planning as well, too. So it's complicated, and I think I had a really critical eye on this as well, because I knew we all wrestle with how to make these priorities. But I keep falling back to this gets reevaluated through the process the team just went through, and you've seen many times. It's like every year we go back and say what will make the biggest difference, and what maybe needs to stay and go in keeping us within our budget parameters. So I would stress to the board that annual process, which goes for most of the year and involves a lot of perspectives, is the process we need to continue to stay within our budget piece. But right now, the short list is what we think will move our system forward. Sorry, John, if I maybe said some things you were going to already say.
Works great, thank you.
I just would say that, I see these, you can tell what went into, excuse me, selecting and identifying kind of this top kind of tier investment. And I think especially around the stuff we talk about as priorities in the board, it's a lot, it's very relational, and it takes some time to be able to build that. I think we all know what we've experienced the last couple years, and I think we've been, our district has, I believe, been very responsible in terms of with the ESSER dollars and thinking ahead, knowing that we're going to get to this point where, we're going to have to make some really hard decisions. But I really see this as maintaining and building the infrastructure to execute and implement the strategic roadmap and priorities where we want to go. So thank you so much for putting this all together, Kelly. Thank you. All right.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John. Thank you, Kelly, very much. I'll try to make sure I don't call you John Benusa anymore, John.
No. Corey, can we just take a
You wanna
bathroom
take-
break for 5 minutes?
5? Sure.
McIntyre, members of the board. With me tonight is Peter Leatherman of the Morris Leatherman Company. He has worked with us for several years doing residential surveys, scientifically valid surveys, and helped with the analysis of those. So now we did a referendum survey just in January here, so he's going to walk you through what those results are.
I'm just gonna take this off so I, all right, super. Then I won't start hyperventilating over here with the N95. All right, it's a pleasure to be here with you this evening to discuss a very different survey from what we talked about last time with the parent survey, the alcohol and enrollment survey that we did. This survey was focused on the community as a whole. We spoke with 400 randomly selected residents across the school district, and then we did a balloon sample of parents. The balloon, so we had approximately 37% in that 400 sample were parents. We pulled those folks out, called an additional approximately 264 parents, put them together, so now we have a sample of 400 parents also that we could look at. The interview times, those fluctuated. We're here, this is hot off the presses. The district just got this last Friday. We were going to start the week, we actually did start the week, you decided to go to virtual. And we did one night of phoning and became convinced it was not the best timing to actually do the survey. So we simply waited until January 25th. And once the kids were back in school, that's been the key for parents throughout this. If the kids are in school, life is fine. And it's not going to overtake public opinion. They'll think about everything as a whole. So the calls actually commenced. We threw out the surveys we did back the week and a half before and started new. Started January 25th, wrapped up February 8th. Average interview time was 14 minutes, non-response rate 5.5%, and each sample with a 400 size is plus or minus 5% in 95 out of 100 cases. Just to put up some demographics to show what the community looks like. Your community continues to get younger as growth happens. How long what's the average time a resident has lived in the district? Comes in roughly now at about 13 and a half years. 13% have been in the district for 5 years or less. You have 18% that have been in the district for 30 years. 20% indicate that they have preschool children. 37% have children attending the Osseo School District, and 59% are empty nesters. That doesn't mean any age, that's simply the lack of presence of a child. So we could have a 24-year-old that doesn't have a child, they're labeled as an empty nester for the purpose of the survey. Looking at the age of the respondent, average age came in at about 43 years. 31% were 18 to 34-year-olds, 29% were over the age of 55. So you can really see the district getting younger as we look at the profile of a respondent. We looked at political ideology on this survey because it's a referendum. It's going to be a political question. Democrats outnumbered Republicans by 7%, 1 in 5 were independents. Looking at political ideology, pretty much a tie between conservative and liberal, 37-34, with 27% indicating that they were moderate. We looked at the ethnicity of the respondent, 60% indicated white, 20% African American, Hispanic Latino 4%, 12% Asian Pacific Islander, 1% Native American, and 3% multiracial or biracial. Continuing with the demographics, just short of 1 in 5 were renters. Self-assessed home value, this will skew a little bit higher than what the assessor actually says because people are more hopeful, especially in this market, on what they can sell their place for, is approximately $330,000. The financially stressed versus financially comfortable, I need to flip it, I need to flip it one more time, has fluctuated all over the place during the pandemic. You are at the place that we've seen now in 2022. This has got as high, the second shutdown, Thanksgiving of 2020, the financially stressed in the metro area got to 55%. That was the high point over the course of the pandemic. It's gone back and forth. Before the pandemic, we were at about 28%. So we're still a little bit elevated statistically from what it was pre-pandemic. But right now across Metro, it's about a third of folks saying they're financially stressed, about 2/3 indicating that they're financially comfortable. Male-female split, 48-52, and then the geography is there at Maple Grove, 47%, 35% Brooklyn Park, 7% Brooklyn Center, 12% are in the other communities in the district. Before I go on, any questions on methodology or demographics? All right, survey says, we have this is a great circumstance to have because we have fresh data close to when the pandemic started. We have survey results in 2019, so we could see what people were thinking just before the pandemic and what they're thinking into the pandemic and how it's changed. I'm going to make comparisons because we've seen a lot of changes over the course of the last 2 years now with people's perceptions on school districts. From the start, what we've seen is once the fall of 2020 happened, the concern has become on the overall quality of education. Folks have not gone to the unfavorable position of only fair or poor. They've become less enthusiastic. They've gone from excellent to good, okay? We see that here also. Overall, you're at 82% favorable to 14% unfavorable. Not statistically significant change from 87%. It has to be greater than 6% shift. But the shift from the excellent to good is significant. It's a 13-point drop and the shift goes over to the good. If you look to 2012, I kept that in as a data point just for you to remember where you were at 10 years ago. The excellent was only 19%. Before the pandemic, the metro area norm on excellent for education, because those that have heard me talk, Minnesotans are terribly difficult graders. They don't get enthusiastic about a lot of things, so it's hard for them to say something's excellent. The norm was 22%. It's now down to 14%. It hasn't, once again, it hasn't gone unfavorable, it's just gone to the soft, the good, the concern. So comparatively, your drop is not as severe as we see across the norm, but comparatively, it's still very strong. Instead of being 1 in 7 saying it's excellent, it's 1 in 3 saying it's excellent, okay? So it's something to watch. That is the overarching concern now, is the overall quality of education and what's happened over the course of the pandemic for student learning. Now, what do they like most about the Osseo School District? What leads the list? Good teachers. Almost 1 in 4 pointed to good teachers. Parent involvement is unusually strong in this district as an answer. That tends to be in small town, outstate Minnesota, smaller communities saying it's the parent involvement. No, 1 in 7 folks point to the parent involvement. If we look at the education piece, the good education and high quality education, you have 23% in that, what is happening in the classroom being the most important. And then if we look at the programming aspect, the broad curriculum, the variety of programs, that comes in at 16%. So your folks stack up looking at teachers, the personnel side, what's happening in the classroom is tied, the academics, then followed the involvement in the community and the programs offered in the community. Just for a basis, amongst parents, the number one thing was teachers, and 35% of parents pointed to teachers as what they like most about the Osseo School District. Now, if we're going to ask what they like most, we should ask what the most serious issue is. You don't have anything that goes to the 20-25% level in an open-ended that we would say is a major concern. We have 3 that are in double digits. The lack of funding, 16%, large class sizes at 11%, budget cuts at 11%, and the pandemic at 10%. All concerns. If we continue down the list, we have declining quality at 6%, diversity. High taxes is very low as a most serious issue facing the district on an open-ended. And we're going to look at that a little more in depth. There's been a significant change in people's perceptions on property taxes in the school district. Lack of discipline, poor spending. If we go also down to the bottom, the nothing, that's the core boosters in the district. That number has dropped from where you were in 2019. It was about 15%, I believe, in 2019. It's gone down, and simply the pandemic has become the answer for those folks. Amongst parents, the number one issue is the pandemic and the impact it's had. 1 in 4 parents pointed to the pandemic as the most serious issue facing the district. Now, how would they rate the quality of education compared to 5 years ago in light of knowing that we have 2 years of a pandemic? In 2019, 37% said the quality was better than 5 years ago, 7% said it was worse. This time, 33% say it's better, 13% say it's worse. It's about a 2.5 to 1 ratio. And we're looking at that. Right now, what we're finding across the metro area is it's almost a 1 to 1. Folks saying it's better to worse being equal. And that is the concern on the quality of education. You still have folks in this district believing, regardless of the pandemic, things are better than they were 5 years ago. They're moving in the right direction. Amongst parents, the better was 38%, the worse was 14%. So it was almost 3 to 1, indicating from parents that the quality historically compared is better than worse. What about compared to the neighbors? Well, Minnesotans always like to think that they're better than their neighbors, and that continues to be the case, except on when we're looking at school districts, because now if you think things are bad, you think they're bad everywhere. It's not unique to your school district, it's across all school district systems. It's not even in the state, it's across the country. In 2019, 41% thought that the quality was better than neighboring school districts, 5% thought it was worse. This time it's 27 to 12. It's still 2 to 1 better. Norm on this one is about 2 to 1 also. So people still feel better comparatively, just not as good as they used to feel compared to the neighbors. You are unique on this question. That this question is, does the district meet the needs of all students, learning needs of all students, most students, some, or very few? From 2019 to 2022, you actually have a 6% increase in those saying all. That has gone down. The norm before the pandemic was 45%. It's now 35% saying all. A 10-point drop. You actually went up 6 points to 47% saying all. And all is a stringent standard. Those that say most, some, or very few, we follow up and say what type of students' learning needs are not being met. That's what's arrayed in the bottom corner. Average students, 22%. And this is of the 49% in that category, in that grouping. 22% said average, 18% said struggling, 10% said English as a second language, 10% lower income, and 10% gifted, talented. So it really follows the theme that we've been seeing even before the pandemic. The concern was always on the struggling and underachievers. That's the change that had happened. When I started doing this 30 years ago, the concern was not enough for gifted and talented. In the 90s, in the first decade of this century, the concern was about average students. This last decade, the concern has been about the struggling and the underachievers. So it's just remained the same. It's grown, but it hasn't grown here as a concern as we've seen elsewhere. Class sizes. This survey, we told folks, we gave them numbers to react to. So they're not reacting to what they hear in their neighborhood or any stories. They're reacting to fact. What we told them, if I can find the specifics, in elementary schools, the average class size in the 2019-2020 school year was 24 students. The range for class sizes in elementary schools is targeted between 25 and 33 students. Does that seem about the right amount? Should it be lower? Should it be higher? You can see 51% say that it should be lower. 48% say it's about the right amount, 1% say it could be higher. If we go to the middle school, the numbers were 30 students, with the target being 33 students in core subjects. 55% said that was about the right amount, 43% said higher, lower, 1% said higher. In the high school, it was 28 students in the core subjects, with the target being 33, and you can see 63% said that's about the right amount, with 34% saying it should be lower and 3% saying it could be higher. The concern on class sizes is at the elementary level. It dissipates as you go down from middle to high. You still have a third of folks saying that they're too high in the high school. For the parents, I'll give you the parents' numbers on those saying lower. In the elementary school, 53% of parents said that class sizes should be lower. In the middle school, 54% said they should be lower. And in the high school, 45% said they should be lower. So parents kind of equaled the concern across all the grade levels, unlike the community, but still tipped more towards the concern at the elementary level than the middle school level. Now, one question we've been asking in many school districts, and finally let us ask the question, because in doing focus groups, I made a bit, I think I did my first focus group about what people think about as a reasonable class size back in '95, when I started with my business partner, who was my professor, is what's a good class size? You know, what do people think is reasonable? So much depends on where you grew up, what your experience was, everything like that. And so when we started talking with folks and you started asking them about lowering class sizes, they're not thinking about going from 30 to 29. They're not thinking about going 24 to 22. They're thinking of going 24 to 16. Okay, so what we've started asking in districts, and this is the statement we read in this district: if the district decreased class sizes by 1 student across all grade levels, the additional cost would be approximately $5.2 million per year. Instead, this funding could be used for additional student services and programs. The question then is, would you prioritize funding for decreasing class sizes, or would you prioritize funding for additional student services and programs? Amongst the community as a whole, 32% said that they would prioritize lowering class sizes. 51% said they would prioritize the funding of programs and services. 8% said neither, and 10% were unsure. If we look at intensity, those that feel strongly one way or the other, it tips about 10 points higher to programs. That's the community as a whole. Amongst parents, it's an even greater difference. 66% of parents, knowing that information, said prioritize services and programs instead of cutting class sizes. 30% said decrease class sizes. What it comes down to is the realization that what they have in mind to lower class sizes is financially not feasible when you put it and pit it against each other. And so programs targeting, personalizing education, going back to the open enrollment survey that we did, the responsiveness, everything to try to make larger class sizes feel smaller is kind of the direction that the community and parents would be interested in. Now, some specific school district perceptions. We can look at 2019 to 2022 on this. First off, does the district ask voters for a property tax increase only as a last resort? 67% agreed with that statement in 2019. We're up to 78% agreeing with that statement now. That one varies across the metro depending on how often a district has gone or how recently a district has gone out. Do they trust you to do what's right for children? This one has been difficult for school districts and has gone all over the board. And I can promise you, I'll say this up front, these results would have been very different a year ago. They would have been very different at the start of this year. These sorts of things, sometimes I say change is glacial in public opinion. This one, I think, changes week to week on some of these things. The trust to do what right is the highest we have so far in 2022 at 87%. Have you spent past referendum funds responsibly? A 12-point increase, 81%. We didn't ask the question in 2019, but just flat out, does the district spend taxpayers' money effectively and efficiently? 78% say that you do. The norm on that is 55%. So you're 23 points higher. If we're looking at fiscal credibility, and we've got another chart coming up on overall financial management, the district is in a stronger position on financial management than it has been in the past. We have a drop on the first set of bars on this chart, but it is still amazing that you're at the level you're at. One item, and is common sense. It makes sense when we started getting this result and this question is, does the district do a good job of involving the community in important decisions? It's been kind of hard to involve the community in important decisions for the last 2 years as you're meeting virtually. So what was a 75% norm before the pandemic is down to 65%. People aren't saying no, they're saying, I don't know. I have no idea how to be involved, especially non-parents. Your district, it's not even a statistically significant drop. 81% still say that you do a good job of involving the community. However you've done it, the community gives you credit. Do you provide a safe and secure learning environment? Yes, unchanged, 92%. Are they proud and would recommend the schools? Yes. 3-point drop, not statistically significant. And then the critical question on this one, I call this one the dipping the toe in the waters of referendum. This question is, the schools are a good investment and I would support a property tax increase to protect that investment. Haven't said a bond referendum, operating levy, tech levy, haven't said what the uses would be for, anything about the dollar amount. Simply the key is how many people in concept disagree with that statement. What's the core opposition? Your core opposition is 24%. Okay, over the last 5 years, the successful referendums, the key is for the core opposition to be under 30%. So just in theory, they're against anything. At 24% is a very manageable. That shows that the district's willing to have a conversation. When 2/3 of folks are saying, yes, I would be willing to have a property tax increase. The question we didn't ask in 2019, and this one probably would have been different last week and probably be different next week, but this is the one that's gone all over the place over the course of the pandemic, and that is, I am satisfied with the school district's decision making. Right now, relatively strong. 63% agree, 20% disagree, better than 3-to-1. The norm on this is just short of 2-to-1 in the metro area in the last 3 months. So very strong amongst parents. It's 73-to-22 agreement, so better than 3.5-to-1. We follow up and we ask, is there a specific issue you agree or disagree with, depending on how they answer that, with the school district's decision making, and if so, what issue is it? The issue obviously has been how you've handled the COVID pandemic and masks. Every school district's dealt with it over the course of the school year. Amongst those that said they agree or disagree, 23% said they agree with how you've handled the COVID pandemic, 9% disagree. So it's better than 2-to-1 in favor of agreement on how you've handled it. On the mask policy, 18% agree with the mask policy, 2% disagree with the mask policy. The mask policy we saw early on, even going back to 2020, it's not so much whether you think kids should or shouldn't wear masks, it's whatever keeps them in school. There's a core, about 20% that would want the mask on. But if they have a mask on or don't have a mask on, whatever keeps the kid in school is the critical motivator for how parents view the masking policy. So once again, what we see, and we've seen this, we were doing some surveys with Eastern Carver when they ended up on the Today Show for the brawl at the school board. It was still, at that point, that one was 4-to-1 with the community and support of what the district was doing. What you see and what's happened over the course of this year is the vocal opposition has shown up, and the vocal supporters don't raise their heads. It's just the political environment we're in, and so it's very, this could change. You'll have a decision, I'm sure, in a month, but this is a very strong result in what we've seen over the past 3 months. At the start of the school year, across the metro area, because everybody was making these decisions, it was actually a 50-45 tie in the metro area survey we did at the last week of August. Job performance ratings. Across the board, there's been drop in unfavorable, or a drop in favorable, but the position hasn't gone to the unfavorable, they've gone to the uncertain. This is a little atypical. This actually harkens back to the first 6 months of the pandemic, where we saw this when we started asking about school districts, about what they think of the school board, the administration, even when we work with cities, what they think about their council. Folks, especially non-parents, weren't paying attention to local government. They had the pandemic, they had social justice, we had the presidential race, we had all of those sorts of things. And there was this disconnect. We saw high levels of uncertainty in district after district amongst non-parents. That has mitigated for the most part across the metro, but you're on the higher side of the uncertainty. They haven't gone unfavorable, they just don't know. And I did a crosstab run before I left the office this evening. That is, they are almost one-to-one non-parents. So they're just not paying attention and indicating that they're unsure. But as a rating, the board, 65 to 19, it's better than 3 to 1. The norm on that right now is 1.5 to 1. So it's about 55-40 is the norm. On the administration, it's 60 to 13, just short of 5 to 1. The norm on that is 2 to 1. Principals, 71 to 14. That one varies, but that's stable. You can just see the shift is in the uncertainty. And then teachers at 85 to 6. I mentioned this earlier, property taxes, significant change in property taxes. I don't know what's gone on in the last 3 years in the district, but the blue bar, the dark blue bar in 2019, 53% thought their total property taxes were high. Now 41% think their total property taxes are high. If we look at school taxes, it was 48% saying they're high, now 41% are saying they're high. The district has gone from a hostile tax climate to a tax-sensitive tax climate, and it's a significant shift. When you have a hostile tax climate, it is more difficult, it's harder to ask and get residents to support, especially the persuadables, a tax increase. When you're tax sensitive and you pair that back with that core opposition we saw at 24%, it's not that people are going to skip in the polls supporting a property tax increase. They're willing to have a discussion about it. They're not reflexively saying, I'm against this simply because it's a property tax increase. So significant change in the district on the perception of property taxes. Overall evaluation of financial management then, in 2019, it was 63%. Now it's 69%. It is statistically significant at 6%. Is the difference. And we pair that back in looking at spending past funds responsibly, spending them effectively and efficiently, spending referendum funds responsibly, past operating levy and referendum funds responsibly. The district has a strong reservoir of goodwill and credibility on financial matters with the public. The unfavorable is only 19%. This one varies from district to district. The threshold, we're always pleased when a district is over 55% favorable. And there are districts that actually have more folks saying unfavorable than favorable. What's the overall value of the education provided by the district then, when they think of the property taxes and the quality of education? It was 81%. It's now at 77%. It dropped 4 points, the less enthusiasm, and that goes to that shift from excellent to good in the quality of education. That concern trickles all the way down to the value question. But still, very strong. We're looking at 77 to 17. We're always hoping that you have over 7 out of 10, 70%, indicating the value is good. And that's regardless of where you are in a property tax level scale. Technology. This is interesting. We didn't ask this question in 2019, so I don't have the comparative, but the pie chart on the left asked how important is technology to use for today's students? Absolutely essential, very important, somewhat important, not to or not at all important. 48% indicate it's absolutely essential, 35% say very important, 10% somewhat important, 6% not to or not at all. 10 years ago, the absolutely essential was 65% was the norm. It continued to drop, and it's not that people became inundated just technology for technology's sake. They want it tied to the classroom, what's happening in the classroom. When the pandemic happened, a lot of school districts thought, okay, people are going to see the technology now is absolutely essential. That actually reversed what happened. And where I was doing a presentation, Lake Edina, when they went for their tech levy last fall or last spring, They actually had less people saying that was absolutely essential than before the pandemic, because I think folks thought that if they said it was absolutely essential, they were afraid kids would stay in distance learning the rest of their lives. It really changed the whole dynamic. So you have to convince them, you're going to invest in technology for kids in the classroom, not for them to be at home. You're relatively strong. You almost have a majority. The norm on this absolutely essential right now is 41%. You have 48% saying absolutely essential, 83% indicating very important. And it's an important difference. If something's absolutely essential, it's not a want, it's a need. If it's very important, it can be perceived as a want instead of a need. Amongst parents, 72% say it's absolutely essential. How do folks rate the technology in the Osseo School District? 71% rate it favorably, 17% unfavorably, 12% are unsure. Once again, they're not enthusiastic about it. They're saying it's good, it's not excellent. Amongst parents, the rating is 84% favorable to 16% unfavorable. So as we talk about tech levy possibilities coming up in the survey, it's going to be important that people don't think that the technology opportunities are in terrible position. The shift is going to be how the investment in technology is going to make the rating go from excellent to good. But the most important part is going to be how you're going to connect that to the classroom. Not only keeping the kids in the classroom, but the curriculum, the instruction in the classroom. What's the predisposition? If they heard the district was going to ask for a property tax increase, are they for any property tax increase, against any, or are they for some and against others? You start out +2. You actually have 2% more people saying they're for any property tax increase than against all. The against all actually mirrors exactly what we saw earlier on in that question of supporting a property tax increase, that 24%. You're going to see that theme across this survey. So very good position. Over the last 5 years, the successful referendums, it's a quick difference. Looking at the for all versus against all was -4, meaning there was 4% more opposition at the outset than support. You're actually at a +2. It's a great position to be at, but the key is going to be the persuadables. Half the community is indicating that they're for some and against others. Now, on the operating levy renewal, we see what we always see, extraordinarily high levels of support. Typically, support is between 75 and 90%. There's no property tax increase. People don't have to pay anything more, and there's going to be no cuts on the table. So you have 70%, 90% support, 8% opposed, but it is soft support. You're going to have to go out and make the case, and we're going to see this when we talk about new money in the discussion moving forward on need. So if the district asked for a property tax increase, what would be a reasonable amount for an operating levy? Well, that 24% that said they were against any property tax increase actually goes up to 27%. You had 3% Minnesota Nice that said they support nothing. The threshold we're looking for on that one is under 35%. So you're 8 points below those that are saying there's not a dime I would pay. If we look at where does the median come in, taking out those that say nothing, comes in at just over $7 a month on the average house is a reasonable tax increase. Now, that number's not set in stone. That's meant to be a guidepost for you, realizing the further you go from that, you have to have high levels of support for what you're asking for, the use of the money, which is why we ask this next question. Would you support a property tax increase we tested 3 purposes. What leads the list is providing additional support for underachieving students and students who are below grade level. 80% support a property tax increase for that purpose, 19% oppose, 57% strongly support a property tax increase for that purpose. Next, increase social, emotional, and mental health programs and supports for students. 82% support a property tax increase for that purpose, 53% strongly support, and 17% oppose. And then lowering class sizes, 80% support, 48% strongly support, 19% oppose. So we come back and then test an additional operating levy of $318 per pupil unit over the next 10 years. We tell them that the funding could be used for some of the improvements we just discussed. On a $250,000 home, it would cost about $7 a month, and on a $350,000 home, about $8 a month. Right at the comfort level where folks told us before they knew what the funding would be used for. So we have very high levels of support. It matches up the tax tolerance with the uses, and we have 72% support to 26% opposed. Once again, you have that core 25%, doesn't matter what you ask for. If you look at intensity, 21% strongly support, 8% strongly oppose. It's a long way away to the election. You're not going to have a lot of intensity at this point in time, but it's 3-to-1, 2.5-to-1 in favor. What has to shift, and what will shift naturally over the course of a campaign and a discussion, is the reason for their support. Right now, folks, the blue bars are the reasons for supporters, the red are the reasons for opponents. Reasonable cost, 22%. Children in the district, 22%. 21% say education's important. Those are all wonderful things. I'm not being facetious, but nobody wakes up on election day and says, I need to go vote because the cost is reasonable. They get up to vote because it's important and it's needed. And so the discussion will have to be, over the course of this, is you're starting with a baseline of 10%. You see need for class sizes, it's just needed for mental health, needed for struggling. You're going to want that need to be the number one issue, because you want people to walk in the voting booth and say, just do a simple cost-benefit analysis. We've looked at all the other issues that they could bring in the voting booth, and you don't have them. The atmospherics are strong. You want that simple cost-benefit, and what drives the cost-benefit is logical consequences for the request and the necessity of the request. If we look at the opposition at this point, it's very low to start with, but there's no clear, taxes too high, no children, poor spending, cost too high. The state gave you money. That's the theme we've heard for over the course of the last election cycle also, and then 1% said it wasn't needed. We look at the tech levy, the $8.8 million technology levy. We actually have a little bit more support, 91% support, 8% opposed. Strong support is up to 23%. So both renewals, not surprisingly, very strong. That's what we're looking at. Now, a tax increase for technology. This is in addition to the operating levy. 25% say nothing. It's actually less than operating, and that goes back to you have more people saying technology is absolutely essential than other districts. Average comes in, take out the nothings, comes in roughly at about $550 a month. Is a reasonable tax increase before they know what the funds could be used for. So as we go through and ask what the funds could be used for in technology, what leads the list is, get it on here, expand staff training to more effectively use it in their teaching, use technology in their teaching. 80% support the use of a property tax increase for that purpose. Next, provide new and improved communication systems with parents and students. 77% support. Enhance safety, security, including security cameras, visitor management, and digital communications. 80% support. Enhance cybersecurity for district technology, 75% support. Acquire new digital resources to expand the use of technology for instruction, 70% support. Update the district's infrastructure such as Wi-Fi, servers, routers, and wiring, 74% support. You have 3/4 support across the board or higher for all 6 potential uses of the additional funding. So we came back and asked, instead of, increasing the current tech levy by $2.3 million to a total of $11.1 million. And we told them on a $250,000 home, it's $2 a month. On a $350,000 home, it's $3 a month. So it's actually lower than the tax tolerance, and you have high levels of support for all the components. So not surprising, we actually have 72% support with 26% opposition. That opposition is almost a 1-for-1 from the start. When we asked that first question on Do you support a property tax increase to protect the investment? They were consistent throughout. The key is that what was asked for, the amount that was asked for, and the uses of the funding did not increase that opposition. So nothing grew based on the requests that we put forward, either for the operating levy or the tech levy. Similarly, as with the operating levy, the push in the discussion will be the need, the necessity for it. At this point, it's education's important, reasonable cost, and children in the district. A few more questions then on communication. An overall evaluation on communication. This is really strong on the communication section in light of the pandemic. I think communication might be strained just as much as teachers, because especially parents, lived and died by communication on an hour-to-hour basis, almost. An overall evaluation in 2019 of communications, 87% favorable. Now it's 81% with 17% unfavorable. But it's a whole different dynamic of what the requirements are for communication. Amongst parents, that rating was 85% favorable, extraordinarily high. How informed do they feel about board and administration decisions? It was 66%, it's up to 72%, indicating they're at least somewhat informed. And just the shift that you could see when we asked parents, 89% said they're somewhat informed. That goes back to they're literally wondering what's going to happen next week based on your decisions. They are paying attention. How are they getting information? The website, 23%. Word of mouth is still alive, lush. 1 in 5 folks, that's their primary source of information. The local newspaper at 14%, district newsletter at 11%, and email at 10%. Just to give you, though, a view at the parents, 53% of parents said email is their primary source of information. That's been set in stone with this pandemic, with parents living and dying, checking the email in the evening. Before, parents would say, yeah, send me an email, that's my preferred source. Now it really is the primary source. 25% of parents said the district website, so almost 80% were either email or website for parents. How would they prefer to receive it? 21% indicated the website, 14% email, 14% the newsletter, 14% are brutally honest and said they really like hearing it from other people, word of mouth, the grapevine, it's the best way to get information, 12% the local newspaper. Amongst parents, 59% prefer email. So overall, you're meeting the needs of the community on communications. The ratings are high, and where folks are telling us they're getting their information is matching up with how they would prefer to receive their information. So I think at that point, I've rambled on long enough. I'll open it up. I'll answer any questions you have.
All right, thank you so much. Thoughts, questions? Yes.
Just a couple quick ones, and then I'll probably have some after, but just on this last slide, we've been heavily using phone, like voicemails and text messages. I don't see that reflected in here. Can we get that added for next time?
This is open-ended.
Okay.
They can tell us whatever. I know the phone and text are in the scattered category. It just didn't have more than 1% saying it, so it's not a separate category, but it's open-ended, and we collapse them in it's kind of like nobody really, it's necessary and needed, but nobody prefers it. You know, nobody's gonna say, hey, I prefer to get a phone or call or a text. They're gonna say, especially parents, it's gonna be email.
So there was a lot to, I think, celebrate and to be proud of in this report. But also still some opportunities. One of the questions I had, when I initially looked at this report is this data for the entire district? Or does it at any point narrow to parents that have children in the district. And you sort of elaborated on that as you went through the presentation, the differences in that. But just in terms of a visual, in the future, is it possible to get some sort of a breakdown between the larger community, including the empty nesters, and then parents that, you know, have children in the district?
Absolutely, yes.
With that said, I don't want to undervalue the importance of the empty nesters, you know, as it relates to the financial stability of our district. But setting, you know, the levy aside or the referendums, looking at some of the experiences of parents in the district, it would be nice to have that visual to view specifically related to parents.
So we did receive the detailed reports, parents versus the total.
Mhm.
So it's the question, just want to understand that visually to, in the meeting, to review it in that manner?
Mhm.
Okay.
And then I think that's it for now.
All right.
Thank you.
Do we know, so thinking about the wide geography of our district, did we see any particular insights that would say there's statistically significant variability in perceptions across the district on these questions? Or have we not cut the data that way yet?
There normally is. This data is so fresh, I haven't
Yeah,
had a chance
okay.
to actually run cross-tabs. That'll be part of the report, where we look at, you know, those demographic breakdowns, whether it's geography or age or ethnicity and all of it, and we'll point out the statistically significant differences, absolutely.
Okay, great.
I'm noticing that the results about technology are interesting, is that parents especially really support it. Where people don't like it is when it's associated with distance learning, which people, especially parents, didn't like. And I can't find it where it is, but that it also seemed like people were really interested in investing technology in as we integrate it into the classroom better, rather than just having it as the, you know, the not in-person option.
Absolutely, and that's really, it's been critical, you know, I talked about that shift and the absolutely essential over the past decade. And I would say maybe, you know, 2008, 2010 was just device. And folks started saying, okay, it's just not about devices. And, you know, we do focus groups, and, you know, it's like, you have to keep in mind, there are 70-year-old people in the district that have not been in a classroom and have no idea that you don't even have chalkboards anymore. They haven't seen a whiteboard. And to put that out there, so for that, you know, I've had districts for tech levies do tours for senior groups to come in and see a modern classroom. It's amazing when they see how kids are educated today, those sorts of things. So it's important. So and to connect it back to the curriculum and the programming, just not to have a device for device's sake. But now you have the added, like you said, it's not for device's sake, but also to have a device to keep the kid at home. It's for in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
That was the last, he died, and they did this huge mailing. It was in-person learning technology and everything at the end, just so parents, you know, and it passed overwhelmingly. But it really is important that people realize that that's not any scenario that folks want to go back to.
Thank you. The other thing I noticed is that we have strong support for an operations levy, but it looks like there's not a general consensus. I think I saw it was around 40% that people feel like schools need more funding. So I was wondering if you can kind of talk about, you know, people want to help support the operations levy, but there's a disconnect with this awareness of where we are at with funding schools.
Right, and I mean, there's always been a disconnection on what, yeah, I didn't put that chart up, I should have. Do you think the Osseo area schools are adequately funded? 40% said yes, 51% said no. The 40% saying yes is very low.
Okay.
What we've seen over the course of the pandemic, first off, it was three parts. the community as a whole, non-parents especially, thought districts saved a ton of money because you closed down schools. So you didn't have to bus them, you didn't have to clean the schools, you didn't have to heat it. Lots of money was saved there. Then you got 2 rounds of federal government spending, ton of money there, and then the state gave the greatest increase in the history of the state for education last June. And so districts were running upstream this past fall with that message on the adequacy of funding, where before the pandemic, it was more what you see, 40%, 45% saying yes, 40, 45, 50% saying no. I don't know. It's getting up to one point last year at 78% in one school district that was going out for a referendum saying, yeah, they're adequately funded. Okay, so that becomes a difficult challenge. You actually have more folks now, and I think part of it is it's the distance from the messaging on the federal government spending. It's a distance from the education funding discussion last fall or last summer, but I also think education has done a pretty decent job in explaining those things. When we're talking with AMSD and that group, there was this push in order to explain. I talked about, it's almost a 3-part vaccination. I didn't know at that point it was going to be a booster involved, but it really was. You have to explain the closing of schools, how it didn't save you money because it was a complete shift to technology. You have to explain what the ESSER funds were and that it's one-time money for short, specific purposes, and you have to put in perspective the largest increase, and get that data out there. So I think districts have done a pretty good job of explaining it. And in light of, the key on it is you're asking things that for the uses of the funding, they want the stability, that's why they'll do the renewal, but they also want those aspects because they tie in with social, emotional. It's the number one concern amongst parents is social, emotional support for their students right now, and the struggling and to help catch up, fix that quality of education question. So you will have, even in light of more districts residents saying they're adequately funded, there's still support, especially for those things, because a lot of people think there's money needed in order to catch up to what was lost over the last 2 years.
Thank you. Are you done? Okay, sorry, I didn't want to overstep. I had a question about the, one of the last slides, the property tax increase bar graph. And the third row is lower class sizes. Sorry, the other one, yeah. Sorry about that.
Yep.
That one. Yeah, so I was curious about that. How, was this open-ended, or was that one of the questions? Based on previously, we had discussed how people felt about class sizes, knowing how much it would cost and that they would actually prefer that money to be spent elsewhere. Then I was surprised to see still 48% support this. Can you explain that? Talk about it?
No, this is close-ended. They reacted specifically to the list. They didn't volunteer the option. And there's still, when we went back and pit them against each other, it's not that they don't support it, they support this versus this. This is saying that they support both. But if we look back and use that question for the prioritization for funding, what I would recommend is the focus is on the programs and services over decreasing class sizes by just one. What a lot of districts now, and when we did focus groups, it was 6-7 years ago, I don't know, time flies, the focus groups, because we would see this. We decided to do them because we used to test, would you support a property tax increase to maintain class sizes or lower class sizes? And you'd have more people supporting a property tax increase to maintain than lower. We're like, that doesn't make any sense. And then you go and talk to people in focus groups and they say, they're never going to lower class sizes. Okay, just promise me you're going to maintain what we have and I'll invest in that. So it really became the cynical part of it. But I think this is simply telling you, it's not that's pitted as an either or, but this offers them the ability to say both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I thought the class size questions, and once you shared the financial information about it, the insight there, and we do have the class size discussion coming up here in April, so I think that's going to be really key to how we continue to ensure that our community understands kind of where we're at and what our options are. And I think as we consider the referendum, and recently we saw some information with our legislative update that identified that our total local tax was equivalent to the gap of the cross subsidy. So I think we're going to be very thoughtful about ensuring the message as to how we are proposing that the dollars will be used to maintain and improve, and not overpromise what is going to be expected of those dollars. So it'll be an ongoing conversation as we continue to plan, but I think that's something to be very careful and thoughtful, because it's great to see the positive responses, but if we make promises that we don't deliver on, that's going to be very challenging for our trust. Just a comment.
Well, and I would just add there, I got a couple of questions too. Maybe I'll wait till you guys are all through yours first, but that's a great point, and I think of those cross-subsidy areas as programs and services, right? So it's another area to be thinking about that. And we know the realities of, I think this is a key message, I've heard it from you before, Peter, that class size question, what is meaningful to our community is financially almost impossible to accomplish, right? So you're picking, where can we, I love what you said about personalizing and making, if it's a field, if the perceptions class sizes are larger, how can we make that feel smart with more individualized supports and services?
Yeah.
And greater return on that investment than the others. But I'll turn it back to the board for your questions.
I don't have any additional questions. I'm just, I continue appreciating your professionalism and detail in your survey methodology, and we got some work to do based on this information, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive. I think back with my business partner, and he still disagrees with me a little bit, just so that's out there on this, but I've been feeling more and more that districts are going to be better off going an even year, which is very counterintuitive, because in specials, you can have a campaign, you can have a discussion. But I'm becoming more and more convinced as you look at what happened, especially last fall, that turnout is getting lower and lower in off-year elections. Parents are not turning out. They haven't turned out for 10 years, and especially young parents. And they've told us, they're just too busy or they forget. It's just not a priority. So it makes sense in an even year with more people voting, because you can see your core opposition is 24 to 26%. If turnout is 30% of the district, that will have a profound impact. If turnout gets to 60, 65%, it's mitigated. The key is, it's just a different campaign strategy, is you have to communicate early in an off year, or I'm sorry, in a year like this. And that's why, just a couple other things I'll say about the data, and then if there are any other questions. Obvious question, maybe Corey's gonna hit me, was 2 questions or 4 questions? 2. I say 2 because this isn't your last bite at the apple. If this was the last opportunity, if both of these were gonna expire, then I'm too old and conservative to say, put it all in one. You gotta do just a straight renewal and then additional. But because you still have another year of opportunity, and in a gubernatorial year, make it simple. It's a revoke and replace, or whatever the technical term is, for the additional funding. And then that way also, you have logical consequences of it if it fails. That, these things could be on the table. So that would be the recommendation. The other thing is, I would recommend making the decision as early as possible. Because the key on this one is going to be, this isn't a typical, off-year election where even the districts last year were making a decision in August. And then kicking off the campaign on, the day the school starts, and, with early voting, people are voting 2 weeks earlier, or 2 weeks after that. This one, the recommendation would be, make the decision as early as you have the numbers and feel comfortable to make them, but then use the spring as an opportunity to set the framework of a campaign and get the communications out there. Parents are still paying attention, the community's still paying attention, they're not inundated with all the political stuff at that point in time. Then they're gonna go away for the summer, they're not gonna pay attention to anything, and then they're gonna come back and be inundated by politics and be annoyed and not be paying any attention. So you have this opportunity in April and May and the first part of June to set the groundwork for what's gonna happen. It's not a get out the vote effort this fall, it's a communication effort. And the adage to remember is a person that shows up and is surprised the question's on the ballot is a no voter. Make them, everybody aware that the question's there, and that's the critical piece to it.
I have qualitative data for you to give your partner.
Yeah.
I teach for Columbia Heights.
Yeah.
I'm teaching in a brand-new pre-K room with a bathroom that I didn't have the first 10 years because it was an even year.
It was an even year, yeah, yeah. No, he and I, he's almost there. He's
It
almost
failed during the odd year.
Right. And there are districts through the years. I mean, we had one back in 2016, Orono School District could go for theirs with Hillary and Trump. It was just how the survey results laid out, that it just made sense. But for the most part, it's always better to have a conversation, not to get caught up in all the noise of a governor's race or a presidential race. But if you do a good job communicating, I really turnout benefits you. It really does.
Yeah, I mean, you know what I think is fascinating? I mean, I'm thinking about when you came to present in the fall and then, at AMSD too, with some kind of larger questions, kind of bigger questions. I'm curious, in your professional opinion, I mean, you alluded to kind of politics and just things being politicized, but I mean, who are we kidding when our school districts have become, these issues have become completely polarizing, ripping our community to shreds, totally apart. I mean, and so how does that play in an election year like this one with redistricting? And because I think it's almost impossible. I mean, we're at the eye of the storm, many districts, we see that. So I am, given what's been happening the last year, how does that play into these questions?
Great question. The redistricting, I saw, they just had the map. I was sitting there staring at the map while John was doing the financials, not to be rude to John, but I was more interested in the redistricting map that they came out with. I will know more next week. We have, the statewide that we did, I presented to MSD in September. Bill and I finally agreed on 100 questions. I mean, we could add 2,000. But the calls are gonna be completed this week, and I'm gonna run the survey results. And I mean, in this one, we went into everything. I mean, we asked, flat out, we asked about critical race theory, we asked about curriculum, just everything to get a true gauge. My gut tells me you're gonna have the 10 to 15% on both sides that are gonna yell and scream at each other like they did last time, and you're gonna have 70 to 80% of people that just are gonna kind of ignore it and try to live their lives. It's really, it really becomes this battle of the extremes. Sure. But I don't have data yet. I'm sure it'll be. I'm terribly intrigued by the potential of the forward party or whatever that's being proposed, this middle ground party in Minnesota. And I know both political parties are a little concerned about it, especially with Andrew Yang involved at a national level. But the divide is, I think the divide is, I don't think it's going to be any greater.
Okay.
It's just going to be more issues we're divided about.
Sure. Great. Good, I guess, I think.
Yeah.
No, I just think this is such, when I look at these results and I think about even the why, and I even put my parent hat on, and I look at the performance ratings with teachers and principals and the people that are really the front line with our community, that's encouraging to hold on to that. And this is just a great, first step for us as we begin our referendum planning, and I just thank you for this and, your recommendation, and just even about the questions and moving that forward and being really timely about that. It's very insightful and it's helpful. I'm looking at Kay, like, as we plan.
Did I answer your question?
Well, so Peter works with districts and superintendents. You probably knew what I was going to ask, and you did hit 2 of the 3, so well done.
All right.
The first one was, what's your recommendation for the board to consider around the questions piece, right? So thank you for giving your recommendation on that. The second one was about timing, and I think I'm kind of hearing you say we run the risk of being kind of drowned out by the noise around all the elections. So getting out early in the spring, get that message out early and often, knowing that the summer has an impact and then the fall is what it is. So with that in mind, I have one more question, but with that in mind, board members, we intend to come with a proposed resolution and communication plan at that work session in March. Because in theory, if we could get a proposed referendum, a proposed resolution approved at the regular meeting in March, that leaves us the April, May into June window for that opportunity to tell our story, right? So with the third part is, I know with other districts you've done a follow-up survey closer to the election just to try to either validate these results or tell us, is there something new we are now dealing with that, like you said many times, things could change next week, next month. Can you talk a little bit about that? I know that's kind of resetting for us maybe in September? I don't know if that August, when is that?
Yeah, a brush fire survey. And I would recommend, in this environment, I recommend everybody for brush fire, because I go back, Aldo, the superintendent of Roseville, asked me last year before, because they went for referendum in November of 2020 or 21, and he said, when would be the best day for us when would be the best time for us to do survey polling? And I said, the Monday before the Tuesday of the election. That's the only time you're going to have the true snapshot in time, especially with as fluid as things are. So this survey right now gets a big asterisk. This is it might not feel like a settled period for you, but this is a pretty settled period in comparison to where we've been over the last 2 years for folks on public education. Knock on wood, things don't go backwards. We don't go back to distance learning, or if everything proceeds normal. Then I feel more confident about where the results would be this fall. But I would recommend with districts is to do a dipstick survey. It's like 15 questions, short, do it the first part of September, and just see where you're at, test messaging, support levels, especially amongst parents and everything like that. So yeah, definitely would recommend that.
That was it. So unless board members, you have additional questions, or if you have a follow-up, there was a lot here. So any follow-ups, please let myself or Kay know. We can work. I know you're going to have a final report as well.
Yep. Yeah, we'll do the report, do the different demographic differences and everything. And I could put together a PowerPoint. Yeah, it was calculated. I thought, do I do the overall and the parent? I thought I'm just going to focus on the overall here because it's so much information. If I can put that together for you, absolutely.
Thank you, Peter.
All
very
right,
much.
thank you all.
Thank you, Peter.
All right, board members, just before we wrap up tonight, I do want to hit some highlights on the calendar because I touched on one. But coming up later this month, and you'll have a copy. I know I've included the copies of this in the weekly updates as well. At the regular meeting, we'll have our mid-year budget update and the capital budget approval. And then we continue to just hold space for any contract or negotiation strategy sessions, and that basically is on every month until they're not needed any longer. Then in March, we have policy committee before the work session on the 8th of March. On the 8th of March work session right now, the agenda is to have Kay share the district communication plan update. We did that communication plan audit. Brooklyn Bridge Alliance will come and provide an update. There's a new joint powers agreement and just some things that have been changing with that. I think it's really good for our board to hear about those changes. So that presentation will come from Becca. And then the third item is this referendum planning and proposed resolution and communication plan about how we're going to move this through the coming weeks and months. With that in mind, then at the regular meeting, that potentially would be where the board could act on that. There's also you can see some other financial things that are awarded this time of year, LTFM, technology, and E-rate. Again, those kinds of things. If we look forward to April, we were kind of hoping for March, but we're kind of learning that the Metro XU class size study probably won't get to us till the end of February, early March, and we just don't have the window of time to do that analysis and have it ready. Unless we get it early, we could potentially make that change. So otherwise, we'll do that class size update in April at the work session on the 12th, along with the DL4A update and a 279 online update. And then as we move forward into the regular meeting, that's when the time of year we do our DPAC, our District Planning Advisory Council presentation. So that's just a quick look at the next handful of meetings, along with right now a planned monthly virtual listening session, with the first one being tomorrow. And the dates and the days of the week and dates are a little bit spread out to try to create different opportunities in the week for people. So like tomorrow's on Wednesday, in March it's a Thursday, March 24th. It's a Tuesday in April on the 19th, and a Tuesday again in May on the 17th. So that is a quick kind of hitting some of the key things coming to the next set of work sessions and regular meetings. And we all know that it can and does change. I always put tentative across it because things just are continually evolving. So I'll entertain any questions on any of those items. I guess the other big one I'll put out there is the Building a Better Future planning that is coming in May as well. So I know we've just had some of that work recently presented, and that'll be coming back to the board too. I know we're over time. Sorry for that, but I did want to hit some of those key highlights. So I guess I'll just say, if you have any follow-up questions or asks or needs or wants, just please follow up with me directly. So with that,
Okay.
Chair Dawson, I'll turn it back to you for adjournment.
All right, this work session is adjourned at 9:11 p.m.